Okay, who's had their second shots already? Oh, the young fellow.
Thursday. All right, I will call our meeting to order. It's Monday, July 12th, and this is the Electoral Area Services Committee. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded and traditional territory of the Comox First Nation. The first item on the agenda is our management report for receipt.
Receipt.
Moved,
Second.
moved and seconded. Are there any comments on the management report? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed to receipt? Oh, sorry, Director Grieve.
Thanks, Rick.
Oh, sorry, I got it here.
I got it. Thank you. Yeah, I'm just wondering about the management report. I know we had talked one time about the defining, where was it at here? It's actually not on it. I know we talked about actually just not actioning it last year, and it seems to have dropped off entirely. But this time of year, people are curious why public access is to the river systems is being impinged upon. And I remember we had a little report on it that with highways identifying some of the areas where they could make access into the lower Solom and part of the Puntledge, which were either Crown Property, Flynn Row, or MOTI, that since have sprouted up signs saying private property, no trespassing. So I think at the time, Courtney was going through a bit of a transition, and that was one of the reasons why we decided not to proceed, because we'd have to work, of course, with the city on that. So I'm just wondering, I don't see Doug here, but I'm just wondering, what is the status of that, carrying that forward a little bit more? Because it seems like minds are only focused in the summertime, obviously, on these issues, but there's a steady encroachment of Crown land by private property owners to deny access to the river. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff can respond, and Doug DeMarzo is here. The last time we presented a report, it was pretty well, the action was complete at that time, but Doug can sort of comment on whether there's been any changes or otherwise.
Yeah, for the most part, through the renewal framework and the last time the report was presented, we did cease action to continue to direct staff to work on that file. The only notable one that might be considered as part of the exhibition grounds plan looks at a few small parking spots off of that road to access the Solom River, and the remainder aren't on our work plan currently.
Go ahead.
Yeah, to historically, to refresh everybody's minds, the road to the Old Reeves Bridge was actually a City of Courtney road. And when they took the bridge away, we had expressed interest, of course, in using that right away as part of a trail system. When they took the bridge away, they dead ended it, I don't know how many feet from the river itself to actually discourage people from going down to the river. So I just wonder, that it's obviously going to be up to the elected officials to push this agenda forward, especially those that grew up here and were used to swimming in all these swimming holes that have since been taken over and made extremely difficult. So I would think that if not this year, but I want to keep this on the work plan eventually, because I do think that it's sort of lost. It's obviously lost with the province because they ended up giving that whole right away to the adjacent farmer right down to the river. And there's also private property signs right at the bridge. And we know that the bridge right away is probably at least 30 meters, probably more than that. So just a thought. I think that the people of the valley are being shortchanged and need someone to stand up for them. And it's probably just going to be the local elected officials. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. So I'm just going to double check with staff, the access through the exhibition grounds that's going to be appearing on the plan, the work plan for the grounds.
There's, I think, if I recall correctly, 6 parking spots. We do, and if you recall, some of the monitoring we did along that road, the average day you're seeing 12 to 19 cars parked along the road with the no parking signs. So people are still accessing the river, and to my knowledge, there's been no tickets handed out, but I don't know that for sure. So it's still a common parking area along the road, although it does state no parking. So yeah, I think it's medium to long term that we might look at the parking for the exhibition grounds down closer to that roundabout. So I don't think it's short term, but that'll be brought forward in budget reports in the future to consider that along with other facilities.
Okay, thank you. Director Grieve, did you want to make a motion to bring it up at the at our strategic planning for the work plan for 2021-22?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If that would be supported, I think it can't fall off the radar. It's important we keep it, current and, when the time comes and the city of Courtney needs to obviously get involved in this too, probably, to a lesser extent, probably even Comox First Nation. So thank you.
Thanks. I'll just have our vote on receipt and then I'd support that motion. So on receipt, is anyone opposed to the management report? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And Director Grieve, that motion, do you have a wording for it?
Well, it's just that staff take some time and not to publish a big report, but just to bring it back at a later date and to see if there's some possibility of working as well in partnership with First Nations and municipality.
Great, thanks. I would second that.
And if I could just get clarification, is that with respect to access to the Solom in the proximity to the exhibition grounds, or is it something broader?
I think that's better.
Well, originally it was broader because they showed a lot of different areas. Some were inappropriate, some are, some are private property area, but some are just, very, very low access to the river and in those parts where they actually have Flint Row has the property. But I think there was a preliminary report, whether they can find it somewhere in the back of their computer and dust it off and just bring it back. And just to keep it live if we could.
So my understanding was access all the public swimming.
Yeah, the lower stretches of the Solomon and the Puntledge River.
Right, thank you. I second that. Are there any other comments, Director Arbor? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed to that motion? And that's carried. Thank you. On to the first of the reports. We have our Advisory Planning Commission for Area C meetings minutes held on June 17th for receipt.
Receipt minutes.
Moved.
Second.
Seconded.
Yeah.
And are there any comments on the minutes? Hearing and seeing none, is anyone opposed? And that's carried. And we're up to now the roadside garbage and recycling collection next steps for receipt. Moved, and I can second, and I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you very much, directors and chair. The results of the alternative approval process and roadside collection are in, as well as the engagement. Vivian Shaw is on the line to provide a summary of this report and the recommendations that we're presenting for your consideration.
Thank you, Russell. Through the CEO to the chair, this report here is to present the results of the proposed roadside waste collection service and to also provide a summary of the phase 2 public engagement to reflect on the intended goals of this and outcome of the service, and also to provide a recommendation of the next steps. As you know, through the news release last week, in all the 3 proposed service areas, greater than 10% of the elector opposed the proposal and submitted valid electoral response forms, which means that the approval of the service establishment bylaws numbers 648, 649, and 650 were not obtained, and therefore will not be adopted through this process. Overall, the CVRD, we heard from over 300 residents responding to questions via our online Q&A, the online information sessions and emails, phone and in-person counter visits. And based on some of those common themes that we heard, were those that were in support, enthusiastic about the service. But there was also a segment of the residents that were also in opposition, primarily focusing on three main themes. The request to ability to opt out, the opposition to the expansion of CVRD services, and criticism of the decision to use an AAP as an approval mechanism. And reflecting on the past 6 weeks, it was made very clear that the idea of a coordinated CVRD waste collection service was indeed a very controversial one, as evident by the number of responses that we heard from residents throughout the engagement period and throughout the AEP. Although the AEP does provide an alternate path to assent voting by referendum, staff weighed various options and determined that proceeding to a referendum at this time is not anticipated to yield a different outcome based on the following. The overwhelming response to the AEP process and the organized opposition efforts, general challenges with voter turnout, and timing concerns to meet that 80-day window, and also as it relates to the voter turnout issue. And lastly, the financial considerations, as we would need to access roughly about $40,000 in the feasibility study funds to hold this referendum. And going back to our intended goal for this proposed service, it was really in response to residents' desires for a convenient, efficient, and a cost-effective waste management process, which is in line with our services goal of increasing waste diversion, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and reducing the long-term costs to the Comox Valley Waste Management Center landfill. However, through this democratic process, we also heard loud and clear those that were in opposition. And by no means are we discounting those that are in support. But in light of what we heard over the past few months, staff feels it's really important to take pause on this initiative and reflect on that feedback. So in terms of next steps, staff is recommending that this be considered within the broader context of the Comox Valley Waste Management Solid Waste Management Planning process, which will provide opportunities for a more holistic assessment, as well as opportunities to further engage through consultation.
Thank you. I believe there's going to be lots of comments. So I know Director Grieve, you have some prepared. Would you like to go ahead?
Sure, if this is the river, I just dive right in.
You just do.
Okay. Okay, we heard quite a bit on this issue over the years. The fact is, it's just not getting any better. We heard about freedom of choice. Well, I wish we had freedom of choice as regional districts over solid waste, but you may not know that it's the only absolutely mandated service that regional districts have to provide. And being that we're children of the province, we must do what Daddy and Mommy tell us, including a $50 million solid waste management plan that we've completed over the last 10 years or so. Now, I may be wrong, but I don't know if we got one red cent from the province to help us with that. Maybe some of the planning dollars. Did anybody answer that? But normally speaking, we're on our own. So here we are, we're taking care of the waste that the residents are making. And we have huge liability issues around landfills. Now, at our last solid waste meeting last month, they brought forward a budget amendment for $8.5 million in order to start planning for a second cell. Why is that? Well, we're filling up the first one at almost double the rate we expected to. And that's strictly about non-appropriate materials going into landfill. Yeah, a few years ago, we had a report about the composition of waste across the area, across the service. And imagine this director's surprise after extolling the virtues of country living and people composting and being responsible environmentally and recycling and all that, that the report came back that actually that electoral area in the north produced more inappropriate bags going to landfill than any other. In fact, if you took away the organics and took away the products they already had, recyclable products they already had markets for, almost 50% of the stuff in those little green bags was inappropriate. So that was a big surprise. I would think it was the highest or second highest of all the ones surveyed. Now, I think that, we talk about not being democratic, that AAP is not being democratic. Well, I would say that this is definitely a lesson in democracy. We had 2,400 people take the time to come down and file their opposition to this. I mean, obviously, some of it was all red herring stuff and conjecture and fear mongering, but there was a lot of really good issues. First and foremost of, I think, is the fact that that many people would have supported this except for the inability to opt out. There was no provision for that. There was no flexibility in the plan. I'm not criticizing anybody here. I'm not throwing anybody under the electric garbage truck. But we have a lot of people that say that one size doesn't fit all. And I must agree that I had my misgivings on that as well. If the private sector can have variety of pickups, maybe opt out. Well, if not opt out, maybe if no pickup, how about a low pickup? There are people out there that, could probably use a pickup once a month, and there's those that complain that they need it every week. So it's not a one size fits all scenario. The other thing I think that stuck in people's craw was the issue around secondary dwellings. It's the same property and the garbage goes out. I would think that we're trying to our goal is to collect less waste. So if two residents on the same property can get by with 2 bags every 2 weeks, and if not, then they could always get tags for bags and add to it that way to make up the shortfall. I know this stuff would add a little bit to the cost of the proposal, but it's certainly a long way from not having any collection at all. I think that, personally speaking, I'm paying over $120 every few months. I get 1 pickup per month. Mine is up to 3 cans. No recycling, no yard waste. Now, obviously that's not a hill to die on. It's $300 and some odd dollars a year. Nowhere near the amount of money that TELUS, Hydro, and Shop pick out of our pockets every month. But still, it's considerable. So it sounded like a good idea to me. And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there like me that still think it's a good idea. Now, the question is, do we want to take this to the next level? What is the next level? We hear that, the private sector could do it better. Private sector could do it cheaper. Well, maybe they should get a chance to. I know that what we have right now is not sustainable over the future. We have a landfill filling up. So you're going to pay that $8.5 million one way or the other. Other jurisdictions to the south of us, like the RDN, Coma, or Cowichan Valley Region District Capital, are miles ahead of us on this issue. And we're way, way behind. They're doing it better. And we're pretty well stuck in the 1950s concept of, aging diesel trucks crisscrossing the valley every day, picking up waste alone. So, I mean, we got to look to the 21st century here, folks. So I don't know. I mean, or if we go to a referendum, is it just going to be the same? I've got people phoning me saying, when did the other 90% get to weigh in on this? What about the silent majority? Well, perhaps it's there. But the question is, when we only get turnouts at the polls of 28% for an actual referendum on some of them and elections, is it a good enough issue to get people off the couch and actually turn up and vote? I don't know. There's a question. That's $1 million question, whether or not we just, tuck our tail between our legs and run, or do we actually stand up and say, well, no, this isn't really true. This is what's really happening. We need to look to the future. If the private sector can do the same level of service and offer the recycling and offer the yard waste pickup for a comparable dollar, then, I'm one of the few directors around this table that actually believes in private enterprise. So, give them a chance. Can they? We don't know. You have places like Cowichan Valley where you talk about, the private sector being run over by the public sector. Well, they actually went out and bought their garbage trucks, hired their drivers, and they put an actual public system in place. And in that system, I know it's a gold-plated one, we can't afford that, but they actually have tags on all the garbage cans. So when your garbage can gets put in, there's a picture taken of that garbage. And if there's too many things in it that should be in the recycling, then you get a little note in the mail. And that's Big Brother for you. We don't want to go there, but I think, there's some compromise, some room for middle ground here, then I'm all for it. I'm going to make a notice of motion here. When we get to the actual recommendation, I'm going to recommend that where's the fire, folks? I recommend that we pull back, we refer it to at least for a month, and just see if there's a upwelling of any support on this. Once people wake up to where they're at on this stuff, maybe we'll get some more letters saying, well, I actually think this isn't a bad idea. And if not, then if everybody's going to sleep right through the summer, then we just go on. But as I say, the status quo is not supportable in the 21st century. Things are going to change one way or the other. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me this latitude.
Thank you, Director Grape. I think Director Arbour and I would probably comment that both of us do believe in private enterprise as well, and I'll be making comments, but I believe staff have some comments too.
Yeah, I'd just like to provide some information. I would just like to assure the directors and the public that the landfill is not filling up twice as fast. The landfill is filling up as expected. The Comox Strathcona Waste Management Board is proceeding with the work to prepare for cell 2. It is not over budget. The budget amendment was merely to carry on some of the engineering work earlier than was expected, but it is not $8.5 million over budget. And the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service, as Director Greaves says, is primarily funded by the residents and businesses of this region. But and that is done by tipping fees and taxation. But we have been able to secure some grant funding that includes assistance with the development of our organics facility in Campbell River, as well as the transfer station that will be constructed here shortly in the Comox Valley for the organics program.
Thanks to staff. Thanks, Russell. And Director Arbour, I see your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, good democratic process the last couple of months. I don't know that I'll be supporting deferral because we have 80 days before these bylaws expire before going to referendum. So I think time would be very precious if we did decide to go to referendum. I have heard from people. As much as the chatter the last 2 months was the organized opposition to this, in the last few days, it's the people that are frustrated that they feel like their voice is not counted, those who are in favor. And there's quite a few of them, as we saw from our survey results a year ago. So 2020 hindsight, I think I was disappointed by what I thought was a collaborative private company that ended up organizing a campaign against this initiative. And to be frank, while I am for private enterprise, perhaps if we revisit this issue, I would be in favor of looking at public service delivery. Maybe we didn't aim high enough in our objectives, as Dr. Greaves say, around bringing in electric trucks to the valley, having good CVRD positions, staff those trucks, and collaborate with the municipalities on a comprehensive system. I think fear took over a little bit in this initiative, and that's okay. My personal sense is I do agree that at some point a solution needs to be found because it's quite suboptimal what is happening now. But I do agree with staff too that I'm not sure that pushing forward when we got a fairly significant margin above the 10% under the EAP process is going to be necessarily productive. And my thought would be, well, I'd still be open. I'll hear from Dr. Amir and Dr. Grieve if they do want to go against the staff recommendation and activate a referendum, maybe in support. My initial thought, organizing a referendum, first of all, it's like, okay, we've been at this for a while, and that takes resources and time, and staff. I'm sure I want to thank staff for all their efforts on this, and I'm sure they're a little bit tired. I know we had a lot of people visit the regional district, and it's taken quite a bit of staff time to answer every constituent and everything else. So I'm thinking something that could save money potentially in terms of a referendum. I saw the quote of the 40,000 for a referendum. Could be potentially to just look at putting this on the municipal election ballot, in about 18 months, and maybe that would give us the time to do some, if we want to rejig things, for example, if we want to offer a public service rather than contract it out, or something like that. I do want to address my final comment before I pass it back to the chair is, I actually thought our proposal was good. I don't believe, I just commented on Facebook yesterday, people were still talking about the opt-out option. And the opt-out is basically, to me, is basically what we have now. We've got a huge majority of residents that are riding the system free in a lot of ways. I know a lot of people dump in town their garbage and businesses and the rest of that. And I'm sure all the people that are currently opted out of the private service would also opt out, which would mean that the cost would be the same, and it's punitive to the people who are actually using the service. So I actually think that a good garbage system, as we see all around North America, all around most countries of the world, is universal in nature. This said, when we visited last comment, when we visited Quebec, there are things that can be done. When we went to FCM and visited our Beauce colleagues, where they had a municipal owned trucks, and the truck had the capacity to weigh the garbage. So that makes me think about some of the water services we have, where you could have a base rate, and then you could have some weight factor for some of the things. So we haven't really explored that. I think we tried to establish something, get it out of the gate, but some of the public feedback makes me think that maybe we didn't go far enough into our ultimate vision of what we'd like to see in the Comox Valley. Yeah, so I would lean around not dropping it fully to look at potentially putting it on the municipal election ballot. That's me. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Driver. I'm just going to let staff comment on the ability for us to put that on the ballot in 18 months.
I'll ask Jake Martins to come forward and comment on the options with respect to a referendum now or later.
Thanks, Justin, through the chair. Yeah, it's certainly an option to bring forward a separate and distinct initiative in line with the general elections, which will be held next year. It doesn't necessarily have to be a complete repeat. Again, it can be a new initiative with new service parameters that is brought forward, or it could be just a plebiscite and opinion that is sought through that same format. So there's certainly options, and staff here to take direction today.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to probably echo some of the comments that my fellow directors have made in the disappointment in not having this service move forward. I too did hear comments about opting in and opting out. The comments on secondary suites also reverberated with quite a few folks in Area B. But, you know, overall, the one issue that kind of still clouded everything was issues that, you know, we can't really, there's nothing I can do about people who just don't believe in the regional district getting into this service. And while I disagree with that personally, I see that was a big factor in many people's votes. I echo that what we have right now, the system is not working. It's expensive for those of us who are paying for private garbage hauling. And as Director Grieve mentioned, we do have a considerable amount of recyclables that are going into the landfill. I'm going to agree that I don't think right now that I would want to try and seek approval for Ascent. I'm going to agree with staff. If we can put this off for the next election, I think that's possibly a way to go. I hear Director Arbor's and Director Grieve's comments about, you know, looking at some more options if we can look at this as a within CVRD service. The other option I would like to see, and you know, I'd ask my fellow directors to comment on this if they're interested, is improving the market mechanisms so that we still get less inappropriate garbage going into the landfill. And I'm thinking what it would take would be a ban on recyclables in the landfill, and then considerable monitoring of those, you know, all of the haulers to see, you know, when they do come to the landfill that what they're dumping in does not contain any inappropriate material. It would mean, you know, large penalties, and large enough that those haulers would then force their own customers to do the things that we have been trying to do as a government, as a regional district. It's putting that emphasis then on the market. I mean, we heard so much that people wanted it tailored to meet their needs. Well, the market could certainly do that. They're doing it right now. But it does require the regional district to provide some limits and some, you know, especially like a ban on recyclables in the landfill, so that haulers can meet the expectations of what we want. So I see some lights up. I'm going to let Director Grieve comment on that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Well, my understanding is, and I asked through the staff here to the CAO to Mark, that we already have an existing ban on recyclables going into the landfill, but we don't enforce it. Is that correct?
Thank you, Director and Chair. I will refer that to Mark Rutten to provide a response.
Yeah, so we, as part of the fees and charges bylaw for the solid waste service, there are several materials that are banned from the landfill. I'd have to reference to see exactly what it says about recyclables. But you know, one of the key considerations for banning any material is that there are options for that material. So for example, organics, something that we would like to ban from the landfill, but we haven't yet because there is no, you know, solution for dealing with organics. And so once we implement the organics program and there is a solution for the communities, then we'll consider a ban for that material. So regarding specifically recyclables, I'd have to reference that bylaw just to see exactly what it says.
Thanks, Mark. Director Arbor?
Yeah, you know, the staff report does allude to different ways to achieve the objectives of improving recycling outcomes, reducing waste into our landfill. So I'm glad to hear staff a little bit of thought on this, because another one that we learned in that same field trip in Quebec was jurisdictions that have implemented transparent garbage bags, so that people can actually see the content, and then they can have an actual small bag for things that are linked to privacy reason. They can have a little one, but I actually like Director Zamir's suggestion that if we are truly finding that what is coming out of the rural areas is really not up to par, then I am in favor of staff exploring alternative ways to achieve that. And frankly, I think that Director Zamir's suggestion of forcing the private contractors to ensure the quality of the materials that they bring to our landfill is there, is not a bad option.
I believe I saw Sarah Wiley's hand up. Sarah, did you want to make a comment?
I just wanted to support Mark, and I have access to the bylaw here, and we do, of course, have recyclables listed as prohibited materials within that bylaw 170.
Okay, thank you. So then it sounds like we might just need some more support in the monitoring, putting some resources towards doing more strict, looking at when garbage is dumped. I do like the idea of clear garbage bags as well, because we're just not achieving what we want with the current system. I don't see any other comments right now on the report. I saw Director Graves.
One
Go ahead,
final
Director Arbor.
Yeah, one final one, and I mean, basically, I'll probably be in favor of the recommendation 1, and 2 is still a little bit open-ended, but I think you are obtaining feedback from us today. One more is, what do we do? What are we currently doing? Because I hate it. We just gave a volunteer award to James Barth, who's been doing all this great work around encouraging people to do things properly and to stop dumping in the woods and all these different things. And now, I'm sure he's disappointed by the outcome of this. But my question is, what kind of framework as well do we have with the municipalities for all the rural residents that actually dump their garbage in the municipal area? Like, are our penalties adequate? Could we get statistics on how many people are caught and fined around this type of dumping? Because I know it's not insignificant. So I'd be curious to know what current framework we have with the municipalities, or whether the municipalities and the businesses in the municipalities are just shouldering our rural habits.
Director Arbor, could you please clarify what you mean? We have a program, for instance, with respect to illegal dumping, predominantly on rural properties through the solid waste system. Are you referring to individuals dumping in private containers, commercial containers, or what?
Yes, precisely. I'll give you an example. On Friday, I was in town charging my car at the superstore, and there was somebody with a fair size garbage bag that looked like a resident, not a visitor, a tourist, by the looks of things, and they just dumped into one of the garbage cans right beside the gas station. So that kind of behavior, I think, is quite prevalent in how some of the people who don't access a private service deal with their garbage. I don't believe that the garbage from households that don't participate in garbage and recycling just magically disappear into the atmosphere unless they burn it. So and I don't believe we get the full volume of people going to Pigeon Hill once a month. So yes, I'm addressing individual dumping into private or public containers in town.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, Directors, I'll just refer that to Vivian Shaw for comment as to what we do know and don't know with respect to these matters.
Thank you so much, Russell. We have heard this through both the public engagement phases as well. We don't necessarily have hard data on this right now. It's all anecdotal based off of what we've heard. There are certainly people we've heard from people that work at Walmart that it's a systemic issue, and that's why it is an fenced off areas to be able to combat this. But as part of this next phase, we can certainly, through the consultation, if we do end up going down that route as part of the solid waste management plan, we can have a better understanding through further engagement dialogue with our residents to start to quantify that and understand what how systemic that issue is throughout our region.
Thanks, Vivian. Director Grieve.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I don't know. I still feel it's a good time for a pause and a breath. The ink's hardly dry on this report, and we're already trying to rescind the bylaws. Now, that being said, I think a recommendation too, I think what is lacking is an actual frank and honest discussion on waste. Because as I alluded to, that northern director who was quite astonished by the garbage composition report in his area assumed that, you know, everybody was behaving responsibly. And, you know, no offense to the people that aren't out there, but, you know, it's a fact of life. So, you know, however we address this, you talk about, you know, staff being directed to evaluate feedback. Well, I throw it out there right now that, you know, pick up your computer, pick up a pen and paper and send in your feedback right now, especially if you're one of the silent majority that didn't get to weigh in on this AAP. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Grieve. I'm going to call the question on receipt. Or is anyone opposed to receipt of the report? And that's carried. And we have a recommendation that the CVRD board not seek approval by assent for bylaws 648, 649, 650, and that first, second, and third reading be rescinded. Would someone like to move that? Director Grieve.
Once again, I'd be in favor of moving a deferral on that until our next meeting in August, just to give us a little time to get a little more evaluation on what the actual public mood is. Thank you.
Director Arbour.
Before I consider moving it, a question to staff. If we did consider deferral of this to the August 9th meeting, and that the directors came back and wanted to pursue a referendum on these bylaws, we would have lost 30 days. That would leave 50 days. Actually, when do the bylaws, sorry, when do the 80 days is after the close of the EAP. So that's another 10 days. So that would give 40 days to organize a referendum. Do staff feel that if that was the direction of the directors, that you would have the capacity to organize a referendum in 40 days?
Madam Chair, I'll just refer that to Jake Martin's General Manager of Corporate Services to discuss the logistics and whether it's possible.
Thanks, Russell. Madam Chair, yeah, there certainly with conducting an assent vote, there's a fair bit of logistics that goes into that process. And in this case, I think noted in the staff report is that that assent vote would have to be held on or before September the 23rd. It actually has to be held on a Saturday. So that would be September the 18th would be our last opportunity to do so. There would then be a required advance voting within 10 days prior to that, or 10 days before that, which would take us to September the 8th. Which puts it in very close proximity to of course, that August meeting. So I think ideally, if we were going to proceed with an assent vote, we would be looking to get that direction now or very shortly thereafter, prior to that August EASC meeting, so that we can start to organize polling locations across the Comox Valley, staffing for those ballots, other logistics for sure.
Thank you, Jake. Director Arbour.
Yeah, it's a good comprehensive answer, but I didn't get the full, like, it sounds like it's feasible but not desirable. Is that what I can read? Because this will be material as to whether I support a deferral motion or not.
I would just add to this that you have received a strong opposition to these bylaws at this time, in terms of the forms that have been submitted. In order for you to succeed, if success is the approval of these bylaws through a referendum, you will want to take your time. You will want to do it right. You will want to have a campaign of information to bring out that other side of the vote. I just don't think that's possible in the short term that we have now, let alone if you were to delay this for 30 days.
And I'll maybe just confirm with Jake about Director Arbor's comment about preferable and doable.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to me to say definitively that it cannot be done if this was deferred, but certainly that would be a tremendous challenge I would expect. And as the CAO has noted, it would further impact any ability for us to provide broad community communication around this issue. So certainly not the preference, not recommended, but I'd be a bit remiss to say absolutely it can't be done.
Okay, and I see Vivian's hand up, so a comment from staff.
I just also want to echo Russell's comment as well. Looking back, approximately 3,000 residents that had responded to the fall 2020 consultation, it was 78% of those respondents that were in favor of some form of a coordinated CVRD service. And it's also just really important to note that of those considerations for those people that did express support during that survey period, they were interested in the service level that they had envisioned at the time of submissions. So if they had seen that the proposed service in the fall May campaign did not exactly match what they had heard or what they had envisioned, they would have likely opposed the service at this time. And I understand that's anecdotal data, but it's something that we do need to take into consideration and something that needs to be reflected on if we do go ahead with another campaign.
Great, thank you, Vivian. Director Grieve and then Director Arbor.
Yeah, in light of those comments, I think it's a given that unreformed, unadjusted reboot of this plan would not be supported. There's still too much information floating around out there. A couple of things, Enid Slack from the University of Toronto once said that democracy is messy and expensive. And that ballot initiatives, as they have in the States all the time, are generally defeated at least 2 to 3 times before they actually succeed, regardless of how much they're needed, and end up costing more in the end. I think that, as I said before, one size doesn't fit all. This does need a bit of time to rethink. So I'm not even going to be supporting my own deferral motion. But I would like to leave us with one little tidbit from my favorite philosopher, Leonard Nimoy, who once said that the good of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Thank you. I don't think you got a seconder anyways, so we don't actually have a motion on the table yet. Director Arbor.
Yeah, I'll make a comment and I mean, it's good we're spending some time. Sorry, we maybe we move receipt a bit too quick. We're still talking. There's I know for the significant number of people that feel like they didn't get to voice their views on this. So maybe can staff comment, and that will probably kick to Jake, but can staff comment on the opportunities around petitioning processes? Because in my area recently, we had an entire neighborhood, the Craig Derrick neighborhood, that joined the Royston service following a petition of 50%. So are those citizen-led opportunities available if some neighborhoods or communities wanted to test out a petition process? And how would they go about initiating that?
Okay, Madam Chair, and Jake Martins will respond to the question on petitions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Petitions are certainly one of the eligible ways to achieve participating area approval for a service establishment bylaw or an amendment to an existing service establishment bylaw. As was referenced by Director Arbor, with the existing Royston garbage collection service over the years, there has been a number of extensions to that service area through petitions. And the most recent example of that was a fairly large extension to the service area done through largely a community effort. So in those cases, we certainly are open and welcome to citizens reaching out to us to express their desire, their interest in leading such a process. And we look to support that. The petitions that are done on an individual basis through letters that are actually supported by CVRD staff that identify the specific properties and otherwise. And so it's not your kind of more grassroots efforts and where, you know, someone's walking around with a sheet of paper and a clipboard to collect signatures. So yeah, it's an eligible and perfectly acceptable method to expand or create their services. And we would just look to connect with those citizens that may be wanting to bring those forward.
Can I ask what percentage of neighbors have to, like, what is the percentage to require to get a approval?
Yeah, so it's 50% of the properties and at least 50% of the assessment value of those areas as well. So again, in the case of the most recent example with the Royston Garbage Collection Service, I can't recall the specific number of properties, but it was certainly beyond 100. And we had great engagement, and there was definitely a few sort of key individuals within the community that went around to help inform other residents. We supplemented that with letters to all the property owners, and then eventually sent petition forms as well to each household in that area. And through that process, it was successful. Yeah, so it's certainly another opportunity that this could be pursued.
Thanks. I see Director Arbor has a question too.
My last one, I promise. I know it's the second time I say that. Is there, you know, I think our CEO may have referred to that in an email, or maybe I missed that, but I missed the intent of that comment. But is there a third avenue as well, like we see in the liquid waste management plan, where that can satisfy electoral consent? Is there such a thing for solid waste management, or before the Comox Valley ever sees a change to our approach, we would need a referendum or a petition or an AEP?
Madam Chair, I can't say conclusively, but I can say it is possible. And these are some of the avenues that we would explore if you adopt recommendation number 2 and report back to you.
Okay, I'll move recommendation number 1 for now.
Right, I will second. Does anyone have any comments on that recommendation? Director Grieve.
Just one, Madam Chair. I would like to express my heartfelt appreciation to staff. And we know that, you know, we have a lot of COVID crankiness out there right now that, you know, I'm sure a lot of it was focused on some of our staff, and they're all trying to do a good job and do what's best for the greater community. So I just want to express our gratitude for what you guys do. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think we all concur.
Thank you very much for saying that, and we are here to support you, and that's what staff did a really good job with on that. And some of our staff were part of this process, but we'll also be sure to pass this on to the frontline staff who received a lot of those petitions and did unfortunately receive the wrath. We appreciate the public's participation in the democratic process, and we respect that. But certainly some of the dialogue could have been toned down, and certainly our frontline staff did receive the brunt of that, and I'm regretful for that and appreciate your support, directors. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Concur. I'm sorry to hear that our staff did have to face that wrath. So thank you for noting that, and our full support for the wonderful job that our frontline staff do. On recommendation 1, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried.
Move 2.
We have recommendation 2, moved and seconded. Comments? I have one, and I see Director Arbor. I think staff have heard some of the options that the directors have asked and discussed around the table, be it market mechanisms or within government mechanisms, clear garbage bags. Will staff be able to take all of that into consideration?
Yes, for sure. And when we report back to you, there are some initiatives that will be natural for the Comox Strathcona Waste Management Service to take on, but others that may be possible for the electoral areas directors to reconsider, whether it's going to referendum, a plebiscite, the petition process. So we've heard a lot of good input from you, and we'll respond to you and bring it to the appropriate governing body.
Right, thanks, Director Arbor.
Yeah, thanks. I'll look forward to that continued work. I do want to say that a lot of people, I think the vast majority of people who opposed it were quite reasonable, definitely with me and with others. I think there was a lot of reason why people did not want, as you outlined in the report, and that's fine and valid. I think I am also hearing from a lot of them that fail twice and go away. You should drop this. And I wish it was that easy to drop the problem, that we have and move on. But I think it would be from a public policy perspective, just a disservice to current and future generation to just ignore the problem that we have around the lack of performance around our recycling outcomes and waste diversion, specifically in the rural areas that are not serviced by a pickup service. So I think we just need to keep plugging away at it, and I appreciate that all my questions that I had today were answered. So thank you to staff for being well prepared in this endeavor. And lastly, as a democratic exercise, there are co-benefits. I think I also heard a lot of people talking about different topics about their regional districts. So they would come in and to submit their form. And then after that, talk about the palace that we build and the castle of the regional district. And I referred quite a few people to the webpage of the cost of the regional district and how it was the same cost as our old lease and all that. So there was actually an opportunity in there to tell our story and clarify other misconceptions that may exist and that may have caused distrust about the regional district. So the more we keep engaging with residents, the better. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Arbor. Director Grieve.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that, it's okay to have opinions out there, but sometimes you have to actually sit down and think it through and get the real facts. It's, some of the stuff is, as I say, there's a lot of red herring issues that have absolutely nothing to do with solid waste. And again, I think staff were exceptional in trying to reach out, trying to get the message out. So, it's not going to go away. I think, what was the old saying of our solid waste plan? Just because you threw it out doesn't mean it goes away. Something like that. So, I mean, there is a lot of truth in that. Just because you throw it out doesn't mean it goes away. Nobody has a teleporting machine that can send it into dimension number 15. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Grieve. I don't see any more comments on recommendation number 2. Is anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. Thanks, everybody. I know that was a big topic. Next item up is the restructuring of regulatory services for receipt.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors. And Amanda Usinski is here, the Manager of Bylaw Compliance, to present this report and answer any of your questions.
Good morning, through the CAO to the Chair. So this report provides follow-up on the public outreach as per the approved communication plan and reintroduces the amendment bylaws for 3rd reading prior to the bylaws being forwarded to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs for approval. You will recall that this proposed administrative restructuring of existing regulatory services was identified through the Comox Valley Regional District's COVID response and renewal report. Specifically, that the restructuring will result in a Denman Island and Hornby Island bylaw enforcement service and a separate Electoral Area A, Bain Sound only, Electoral Area B and C bylaw enforcement service. It would not present any financial impact to residents. For the merger of the services and repeal of the redundant service establishment bylaws, director consent is required from 2/3 of the participating jurisdictions, being electoral areas A, B, and C, as well as approval by the Inspector of Municipal Affairs. Staff have followed the recommended and required steps that support the legislative process for the proposed restructuring of the identified regulatory bylaw services. These steps included a communication plan to ensure the public was informed of the proposed changes, public communication on the proposed changes, which included a news release, print ads, use of social media and webpage, as well as electoral areas newsletter, has been completed. To date, staff has not received any correspondence or feedback from the public in regards to the proposed restructuring. The service establishment bylaws that are required for the restructure are attached as Appendix A and B of this report for consideration. I'd be happy to answer any questions on this project.
Thanks, Amanda. I see Director Arbor has his hand up. Oh, you're still on mute. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know. I haven't been online I'm losing the habits here. Yeah, thanks. I think it's pretty straightforward, and I'm not too surprised you didn't get, it sounds like, any feedback on this. But I still think that it's a good story when we make things more efficient, and that's I really appreciate that. There is one thing I wanted to draw attention to, which is the use of the reserves for the vehicle purchase in this. And because the term is nearing ending, I'm starting to worry sometimes that some of my comments are not turned into motions and such. So I may come back at the regional board with this, but a number of directors have talked about us buying electric vehicles where possible. And I have talked about creating a policy that would see us stop purchasing petroleum-based vehicles altogether. And I do know that I made a comment when this item came up under bylaw that I believe there are equivalent models to the Nissan Rogue that would service bylaw really well. And I'm wondering if, because I didn't put that into motion, whether further consideration has been made to that, or whether I should actually start working on a policy at the board for us to transit out of petroleum fuel cars as a matter of policy rather than a matter of suggestion.
Madam Chair, to answer the electric vehicles, we do owe it to the board to bring back a report and revisit the policy with respect to the purchase of vehicles. So I do make that commitment that will be coming back to the board in the next couple of months. That's
great. And just to be sure, just to double check, we are not going to purchase the bylaw vehicle before then?
If Amanda can comment on the purchase of the bylaw vehicle and considerations be given to the type.
Through the chair. So I do recall your comment when I brought this forward last, and we have started the process to find a vehicle that will suit our purposes. It may be a light duty truck to the nature of some of the items we do haul around, but we are looking at electric or even hybrid options. I have started the paperwork and through procurement. So we're well underway on that.
Thanks. Go ahead, Director.
No, thank you. So yeah, so if that can be paused, we're not buying that many vehicle, but I think I got a feeling which way the board might go on this if we actually bring a more muscle policy around phasing out petroleum purchases. So I know there's trucks coming down the line really soon. The F-150 is going to be electric, but that's next year or the year after. So it's not right now. So I know that the options are virtually inexistent if we're going to buy a pickup truck right now that's electric. So yeah, I would ask the CEO and staff if they can really give consideration to bringing that report forward before committing to purchases. Thank you.
Yep, thank you very much. We're always very mindful of looking for those alternatives. We do balance the needs of the department and the type of vehicle. We're also very aware of fiscal responsibility also being a driver. So it's that dual weight of the board's interests that we'll take into consideration with respect to any purchase, but also we'll be mindful of that when we bring forward our vehicle purchasing policy and look at the full realm of the needs when it comes to the purchase of vehicles, being mindful that you do want us to pursue non-petroleum where possible.
Thanks, Director Robert, for bringing that up. And I'd also just like to push for electric if possible. And if it's not possible right now, I wonder if staff could comment on the option of leasing so that we aren't locked into a petroleum, fossil fuel-based car.
Yes, we'll definitely give consideration with respect to this particular vehicle and let you know the options and the broader policy, which will help us with the future too.
Great, thank you. Director Robert, did you have any other questions?
No, I was just going to get into a comment back to the CEO, but now we're getting into the content, not the actual policy. But I think we're starting to find out with increasing fuel prices that over the longevity of a vehicle, electric compares quite favorably, and increasingly as the price comes down as well in those vehicles. So I'm actually confident once the report is presented that fiscal responsibility may also be better supported through an electric purchase. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Robert. I just saw $1.65 at the Myrtle gas station, so I agree. I don't see any other comments or questions on receipt, so I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed to receipt of the report? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And we have a recommendation.
Move it.
Moved. And I can second. And any comments on the recommendation that we move forward with third reading? Hearing and seeing none, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Thank you, Amanda. And over to community services, operational highlights for receipt.
We'll receipt.
Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Doug DeMarzo, General Manager of Community Services, is here to present this informational report for you and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Doug. And over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And through the Chair to Directors, just a quick overview of the staff report with the community services operational highlights. I'll just touch on a few that are on the list and open it up to questions afterwards. So I think from the emergency programs perspective, we're continuing to try and bring up this Armstrong building to be our main EOC management room and center, and continuing training with our ESS volunteers and other volunteers. This allows more space in the future for the Comox Valley Search and Rescue operations, as well as allows our consistency with our technology as well, utilizing this room. We do have a Denman Island wildfire tabletop exercise coming up. So that's kind of top of mind for a lot of people these days. And moving down into fire services, you may be aware that our Fire Smart campaign is underway right now, and lots of good reach out into the community by both our chiefs and in the media. So it's been a successful little project. And down in Fanny Bay, we have the playground construction underway. And one thing to be aware of, you received a briefing note around the Seal Bay Bates parking lot. And that's going to be going out to bid fairly soon. So there may be some questions from the public around that. And lastly, in parks again, we have the Regional Parks Service. Recently, we had an article in the Comox Valley Collective as well. So that's out there in the public now. And the consultants hired to deliver a comprehensive background study. We're hoping to report back to the ASC in by October with some outcomes on that process. A lot going on in our department, so that's just a few touch-ons. But I'm happy to answer any questions about those or any other operational items you may want to discuss.
Thanks, Doug. Do any of the directors have questions? Director Grieve?
Yeah, thanks. Good stuff all over. Just wondering about the parks planner. Did we lose somebody? Is somebody leaving, or is this an additional staff member?
Yeah, we are looking to replace that role. The parks planner did leave that we hired in November. So we'll be replacing that role again.
Okay.
And maybe just to add to that, the position was vacant when Mark Harrison stepped into the manager of parks position.
Okay.
Right, so it's filling his. It was filled for a short time, and then that person left, as Doug said.
So hopefully we'll get somebody that's first in more rural park kind of operations. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Grieve. I had one question on the Seal Bay signage. I'm curious what kind of feedback you received from the public and what other CBRD park we might be looking at to change signage.
Yeah, good question. So as we move forward with signage in all our parks, we'll answer the broader question first as it moves through our sign plan and looks at, replacing signs over time. So it'll be within the management plan processes. And, we could be looking as early to the Mount Jeffrey Park over on Hornby as well. But generally, it just follows our maintenance schedule. When the signs become too old, we start using this standard. The feedback was mostly around just font size, from what I recall, and a few little tweaks there and here. I think overall, we got very supportive feedback, especially with the way the wayfinding was laid out, as well as the adoption of the different language components in there. So overall, really positive feedback from people. And I've just heard anecdotally, just the wayfinding component in Seal Bay is much improved.
Yes.
So overall, I think, that approach to the sign plan is the way to go.
Great. Yes, I'm seeing far fewer lost people in Seal Bay. Director Arbor.
Thanks. I love that little preview of potential work around this for Mount Jeffrey. That would be fantastic news. And yeah, I think everything in the report, everything I find in the department is going really well. There's just a lot of positive initiatives. I know the Fanny Bay Playground, the fence came down and people are now using it as of yesterday, and we'll have a little ceremony in a couple of weeks. And those things are so appreciated in the rural areas, very tangible things through our services. So thank you for all the good work. It's not always easy. It's not always, I'm going to make a Director Grieve joke. It's not always a walk in the park. Yeah, thank you. But there's challenges in all those initiatives, but overall, I think once we complete them, the public is always so appreciative. In regards to the Restart Fund, there's a note at the direction of our CAO. So I'm wondering if our CAO has comments today as to what he sees coming down. We've had some extensive discussion around those additional Restart Funds, but I haven't heard in a couple months what the staff's thinking currently is.
Staff will be reaching out to each one of the directors to talk to you about some ideas and suggestions to ensure that we've included your input. So we'll undertake that initial review with each one of you before bringing back a report to the electoral area directors at a subsequent meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I don't see any other comments or questions. So on receipt, is anyone opposed? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. We'll do one more item and then take a break and stretch our legs. So the electoral areas arts and culture grant program funding for receipt.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and Doug DeMarzo will outline this report and answer any of your questions before you consider the recommendation.
Thank you. Through the chair, this is again part of our overall grant revamping process. During budget process, you made way for some room in the budget to bring on unallocated funds to consider future arts and cultural needs throughout the year. This is an example of how we could proceed with that consideration. So essentially this year we received a grant request by Three-Legged Dog Productions for the Philburg Park this summer, $850 for the Comox Valley Writers Society for the North Island Writers Conference. And a little bit of an anomaly here is the Comox Valley Exhibition Association, as we've decided, being a festival and a kind of outreach, that perhaps it belongs in this electoral area grants arts and culture program, as opposed to where it's traditionally been funded through the rural community grants in the past through grant and aid. So just to note that all three of the applications are attached, and it's feasible within the allocated budget to basically look at these three applications. And at that point, we wouldn't be accepting further applications further into the year.
Thanks. There's a question from Director Grieve.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and through the CEO to Doug. I guess historically, CVEX, it basically, the grants that we give them under the old system was just to make the charge for the field a wash, right? It's about rough and ready about what they pay for the use of the exhibition grounds for their weekend. So this just gives them the ability to operate without and get the money from the RD to pay back the RD's other hand from the first hand. So, okay, that's kind of what I figured, and I'm certainly in support.
Thanks. And I just wanted to ask Doug about approximately how much is left in that Arts and Culture Fund. And you had noted in your report that there wasn't a lot of outreach right now, but what might you be doing before the end of the year?
I think just examples of bringing this forward to the ASC table is an example of outreach. We're continuing to work with the city of Courtenay and understanding what the broader regional arts world looks like. They've had a number of new hires over there. So I would say that I don't know if we're going to be doing too much more outreach except for to our direct people that are funded to let them put the word out on the street, including the Arts Council, that, there is that prescription opportunity within the grant until further discussions are had with our municipal colleagues on what this program really looks like overall. If you recall, that was one of the objectives of the original report. And as far as money remaining right now, I think that pretty much with these three expenditures, well, basically exceeds it by like $30 or $40. So there's pretty much nothing less unless Kevin has something to add there.
Love to hear if there's any money. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you very much through the chair to the director. So yes, currently in the 21 budget in our 5-year financial plan, we have $13,467 of unallocated funds. So these three asks would exceed that very modestly by about $533. Our surplus from prior year was slightly higher than anticipated, so we may be able to fully accommodate these asks, but right now we are looking at a very minor shortfall.
Okay, so then that would sort of negate any kind of outreach for the rest of the season. Okay, that's understood. Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing and seeing none. On receipt, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. We have a recommendation. Moved
Second.
and seconded. Any comments on the recommendation of the allocation of funds? Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed? Great, and that is carried. So why don't we recess for about 5 minutes just to stretch legs, and then we'll come back. Back to order. The next item up for consideration is item number 6, 2021 Rural Community Grant Considerations for receipt.
Move it.
Moved. And I can second. And over to
Thank you,
staff.
Chair and Directors, and Dr. Marzo will present this report and answer any of your questions.
Sorry.
Thank you. Through the Charter of Directors, this is the second time you've seen rural community grants in front of you. As you're aware, we do disperse the funds August 1st, so we decided to take this opportunity in July to update you with any new items that have come in since the March 15th deadline, which you looked at in April and May. So as such, 3 new nonprofit organizations have requested some funding through the Rural Community Grant and AIDS, and that is the North Comox Valley Innovations Project, and they'll be looking at the Black Creek Community Association to act as a conduit to sponsor that project. Primarily, it should be noted that the North Comox Valley Innovations Project is the primary recipient of the grants for looking at the early education outcomes. And the Denman Island Residents Association DOC Committee to assist with the replacement of a breakwater. This is mainly the design. And they are looking ahead at some maintenance challenges for that dock on Denman, and feel there's a sense of urgency around this as noted in your application form. And a holdover, I guess, from the last round is the Roy Creek Salmonoid Enhancement Society. You requested we came back with more information. And Kevin does have some more information if you have further questions on it, but basically it's assessed with the building repairs and maintenance support. And this primarily works to, as many of our salmonoid enhancement societies continue to enhance that project. So with that, I just would also note your grant and aid funding is at different levels for each one. And for example, Denman only has about 1,138 left. Area A has 8,483. Area C, 37,175. And Area B, 18,067. We also do have the Excel spreadsheet from the past meetings. If requested, we'll be happy to bring that up on the screen if it's beneficial. As you know, at this time, there's only the 3 applications to further consider. So if you want it, it's there. At this point, I can open up to questions and your debates.
Great, thanks. I think the spreadsheet would be helpful if that could be brought up to the screen. And Director Grieve?
Yes, thanks. I think, don't get me wrong, I would definitely be in favor of the Black Creek Community Hall Association's request. But it seems to me that in past years, because they have their own bylaw, the Black Creek Hall, that I looked into getting some money from the Heritage grant funding. And I was told by the CFO at the time that they were ineligible. And it was to buy some and frame some pictures of the pioneer logging and whatever for their weight room or something. So I'm just wondering what's changed that they can get an extra $10,000.
I think I can probably answer that question. This is actually, Director Grieve, part of the early learning initiative. And they're just using Black Creek as the host agency.
Oh,
so it's their flow through. Yeah, but the funding is coming to the UBC's early learning initiative on childcare.
But the
Pumpkin Patch Bunch, right?
maybe I'll look to finance to further on that question, because I think the actual conversation still remains the same. If they were unable to receive funding before, then they'd still be potentially unable to receive the conduit funding, but we weren't aware of that. Kevin, do you have any further info on that?
Don't mean to open a can of sardines here, folks.
That's a good question.
Through the chair to the director. So yes, in response to Director Grieve's inquiry. So yes, typically if an organization is already receiving taxpayer funding through another service, then we would often defer to that service if it fit within the parameters of that. As Doug DeMarzo does indicate this would be a flow-through item. It is actually an initiative of the Comox Valley Child Development Association, and they are working through the Black Creek Community Association to deliver that program rather in Electoral Area C. So, you know, it is a bit of a deviation from what the community hall service was originally intended for. But yes, we would often try to stay within, you know, the services as they're designated.
Thank you.
Director Arbor, I can't see your hand, but do you have any questions so far?
No, that was a good explanation for the Black Creek one. Yeah, I'm in support of the. Can we just scroll down? So, yeah, thank you. It's already there. So basically, for the Denman one, total funds remaining. That the remaining is if we did decide to allocate to the Denman dock.
No, that would be, you don't have enough money currently to fund from Denman.
Oh, sorry. So then I'm missing out how you're proposing to fund the Denman application.
Yeah, so we're looking at the rural community grants as a whole and open it up as a service. So it's up for debate amongst the directors, whether they have interest in moving any three of these items forward.
Well, sorry, I'm not fully lost, just a little bit, but all I know is that the Denman dock is an important initiative for the community. It's the only public facility for boats on the island, and it's unfortunate they're not. Well, there's pros and cons, but they're not part of Small Crafts Harbor. There's historical reasons for that. But essentially they do need a breakwater for the dock to be. So I'm in support, but I'm not sure how we propose to fund it exactly. I'd like to put it forward, but I'm not sure what I'm put it forward to.
If I understand, Doug, are you suggesting that we can take funding from the other pools? Like, could Director Arbor take it out of his the other slots that he has?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that the directors have that opportunity to propose it to the other directors if you guys have funded across your jurisdictions before. So that opportunity remains available. It is a big ask that came in last minute, and we committed to the organization to put it forward here for consideration because it still fits the parameters of the rural community grants.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm not lost at all. I'm fully with you. And so, yeah, I'm reluctant with those funds, with those grant and aid. I have been of the mindset of, especially for my 5 distinct communities, to try to make it always a little bit equitable. And if there's not budget in the Denman one, I'm wondering if we could look for that amount of money, Doug, would it be possible to look at another source of funding, such as, I think we have 140,000 in the Denman Hornby Community Works fund, or something like that.
Yeah, there's 2 other sources that could be available potentially down the road, which would be the Community Works funds and also the conversations around Restart vaguely still are an opportunity here for that.
Okay,
so those are two other priorities staff could look at.
Okay, so I'll pull it out of the pot, this one for now, and I think we'll have success looking at one of those 2 for sure.
Director Greek, do you have any comments about any other files? Okay. So are we able, the other 2, Roy Creek is technically Area A? Is that okay? And Director Arbor, did you have any comments about that ask?
Yeah, that's one where we were going to do a little bit more research, right, about the people and activities, and I think I was quite happy with what came back from that, the information. So I'm in favor of supporting it.
Okay. All right, and I really like to see the early learnings initiative and the Comox Valley Child Development go ahead. I mean, as we've talked about before, both Director Grieve and I have sat around the table with child development and child care when we see in the rural service areas how desperate the situation is. So I'm hoping that goes ahead too. Okay, I don't see any other comments. On receipt, is anyone opposed to receipt of the report? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. Now we do have recommendations and it looks like we'll be amending that.
Yes.
So we'll go forward with just the 2 items. Is that correct?
There's still a minor shortfall for the area A.
Oh, for the,
You need another $500 or so to bring it up to the required amount.
I
So-
can pitch in for that. Is that okay?
So if I'm reading that right.
Do you want to do that? Okay, Director Grieve and I said we can split the remainder between us 2.
thank you, that's very appreciated.
Okay,
The other option, I guess, was to to give them just what's in the kitty, but I think that's great. Then we'll make mention that area B and area C. I'll make sure to tell that to the folks.
okay. And Director Grieve, are you okay with fully funding yours? Okay. So staff have that recorded, that will fund Roy Creek with what's left in area A and split the difference with the remainder with area B and C. And the Black Creek Community Hall will be funded out of area C. Okay, I guess I should get a motion for that.
So moved.
Second, okay, any other comments on that?
Before we leave the motion, just to double make sure that maybe it's not really a rejection letter that we're sending to the Denman Works, that we can have the opportunity to look at those for the doc, to look at those 2 other pots. Is that fair? Before we outreach to them?
I see nodding from Doug. So,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Hearing and seeing none. Anyone opposed to that funding allocation? And that is carried. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item number 7. 20.
How much, before we move on, Madam Chair, can I just see the number at the bottom of the remaining funds? Just one last look, please.
I'm not sure what. Oh. Doug, could you confirm how much?
We'll update the chart and circulate it to the directors.
Thank you very much, CEO.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa. So was that moved and seconded? Sorry, for the financial plan amendment? Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you. Mark Harrison is here, Manager of Parks, to outline to you the report and answer any questions.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Russell. To Madam Chair, staff are looking to increase land improvement expenditures in 2021 by $25,000 for the Union Bay Connector Trail capital project to support increased construction costs for this project. It is proposed to be funded through the Parks and Greenways Capital Works Reserve Fund. So there is just upland of the trail project. There is new subdivision construction that's happening that has altered site drainage. And upon removal of the vegetation and preparation for the construction, it did reveal some unforeseen site conditions. And this has resulted in the need for additional drainage infrastructure and additional trail building material that wasn't identified in the original engineered design drawings. And further to this, the original engineered design grades for the trail were off by approximately 12 inches over half of the trail length. And then additionally, removal of the vegetation has caused some neighbors to request fencing that was originally not budgeted for within this project. So the Union Bay Connector Trail was requested by the residents of the Seaview Village, which is a seniors complex located at the top of 3rd Street. This trail will greatly increase accessibility to amenities for this seniors population. So at this time, staff is asking for an additional $25,000 on top of the $45,000 that was originally budgeted for a total project budget of $70,000. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mark. Do any of the directors have questions? Director Green?
Well, just that I remember when this first came forward, it had a little meeting up there, and I think Mark was kind of brand new back then, so it's taken a sweet time to come to fruition, but I'm certainly in support.
Thanks. Director Arbor?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's great for the accessibility part in Union Bay, and I wouldn't want to lose sight of a couple things connected to that in terms of future opportunities. You know, I saw the planned parks allocations through Union Bay Estates continuing along the Island Corridor Foundation strip, and I'm wondering if staff have any comments on how that might be utilized or connect to the Union Bay Connector Trail in the future. And then I have a subsequent.
Yeah, to Madam Chair. Yeah, this small trail project will connect eventually into that ENN project as part of the Union Bay.
Thank you. And since we are on the topic of providing access to the senior village that is there, I am of the knowledge that they are looking to expand the number of units over there. So I don't know if our affordable housing society has connected with them, but I guess that's none of the staff here could answer that. So I'm just making a mental note, unless one of the staff knows whether there's been communication with them.
I don't think any.
Yeah, I'm personally not aware.
Yeah, okay, I'll take that elsewhere. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I don't see any other comments on receipt. Is anyone opposed to receipt of the report on the connector trail? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. And the recommendation?
So moved.
Moved and seconded that we increase the land improvement expenditures in 2021 by $25,000 for the Union Bay Connector Trail Capital Project. Is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Item number 8, the Solom River Agricultural Watershed Plan Phase 2 results and recommendations for receipt.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much. And Derry Monteith and supported by Vince Van Token are here to present this report and answer any of your questions. They'll also outline to you the recommendations that stem from the report.
Thank you. And Derry, you just got to. Great. Thanks, Derry. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair. I know Mark provided a good summary of this project at the board meeting on June 29th. So today I just wanted to touch briefly on a few additional components of the work that was completed during the second phase, and then discuss the recommendations presented today for the committee's consideration. So at the board meeting, Mark discussed our engagement with the Comox First Nation on this project and our commitment to collaboration and watershed management. He also summarized community engagement on the project and then went through the 7 recommended actions in the report. So today I'm going to summarize for you the results of the technical assessments completed as part of the phase 2 study, and then discuss next steps and recommendations in the staff report. So in response to concerns about current and future water supplies for agriculture that were expressed in the first phase of the project, an assessment of water storage and demand management options was completed as one of the first tasks in phase 2. And this work really evaluated a number of storage and management options for producers in the Solom, including on-farm storage, which generally takes the form of dugouts and cisterns. However, shared storage and well widening were also evaluated as options. Larger scale storage at Wolf Lake was also included in the assessment. Alternative sources of water were evaluated, including reclaimed water, as there was interest from the community during the phase 1 in better understanding this option. And there are also ways in which producers can reduce the volume of water that they need to use, which we call demand management. And there were 2 demand management options considered, which were improved management of irrigation systems, as well as irrigation system upgrades. So upgrading fruit and vegetable crops to drip irrigation and irrigating forage parcels greater than 10 hectares with low pressure center pivots. So each of these options was researched and ranked in terms of affordability using high-level cost estimates, the volume of water that could be made available, ease of implementation, ease of use, and reliability. And input into this work was provided by both our project advisory committee as well as direct outreach with local producers. During the fall of 2020, we completed direct engagement with both the Mid-Island Farmers Institute and Comox Valley Farmers Institute on this work. So overall, dugouts were the highest ranked storage and supply option due to the volume of water that could be made available, as well as their lower financial and administrative burden. Demand management also scored highly, but was able to provide only minimal volumes of water. However, that said, when considering future water use and climate change, it's likely that a combination of options will be needed to meet this future demand. So to enhance understanding of the water supply in the watershed and how it relates to demand on both a month-by-month basis and for each sub-basin, a watershed health assessment was completed. And the sub-basin boundaries used in this assessment are shown on the map here in different colors. So the term water budget was first used to describe this work, and you may remember it from phase 1. However, it was updated during the project to watershed health to acknowledge the KFN worldview that water is not a commodity, but rather a watershed is a sacred living system that we rely on and care for. Overall, the results of the watershed health assessment indicate that approximately 3/4 of water demand in the watershed is provided by groundwater. There is also a very strong contrast between the wet period and dry periods of the year for the Solom. July through October are months with very low flows, and groundwater is also a key contributor to the stream and surface water flows during this time. While the assessment showed that the rate of groundwater extraction is a small fraction of available supply or recharge over the entire watershed, the Portuguese Creek subwatershed was shown to see groundwater extraction approaching 10% of groundwater recharge. And there's really no official guidance on the percentage of recharge that's safe to use. In other areas of Vancouver Island, 15% has been proposed as a potential safe percentage. So because of this, further data gathering and caution in authorizing future groundwater use extractions is advised in the Portuguese Creek subwatershed and in the lower Solom subwatersheds. And it's recommended that groundwater levels be actively monitored. And Mark discussed this as one of the recommendations during his presentation, and that this monitoring data be regularly updated and analyzed to determine the cumulative impacts of extraction and use. The work also updated the assessment of future agricultural water demand that was completed as part of the watershed health assessment. And this was done using the agricultural water demand model. And it showed that agricultural water demand under projected 2050 climate conditions could increase by 3-fold up to 7-fold. Sorry, this one's a little small, but I think the colors are the most important. So to evaluate the risk to aquatic life under current and potential future water demand, an environmental flow needs risk assessment was completed using the provincial EFN environmental risk management framework. So the assessment considered risk ranked on a monthly basis from 1 to 3, 1 being low, 3 being high, using 9 points of assessment within the watershed. And each point of assessment represents the furthest downstream point of each sub-watershed, which was shown on the previous map. Because streams and aquifers are known to be connected in the watershed, 2 approaches were taken to assessing this water use. one considering surface water only, and the second considering total demand, so groundwater and surface water. And risk was then assessed under 11 different water use scenarios that were developed in consultation with our advisory committee. So the chart here is for the month of August, and it's using the total water demand, so groundwater and surface water use. The 11 water use scenarios are across the top with the 9 points of assessment along the y-axis. And the risk assessment showed, I guess, August as the month with the greatest risk, with risk level 3, which is shown in red on the table, for the Portuguese Creek and lower reaches of the Solom, and risk level 2 shown in yellow for all other points of assessment under current agricultural production. There are also several caveats to consider with these risk ratings, most of which result in the risk presented being understated. And the findings of the EFN risk assessment have informed a series of recommendations for regulators to consider if additional water use is planned in the area. And these together form recommendation 7 in the final report. So the technical teams that completed these assessments put forward a number of recommendations. These were added to and amended based on additional feedback and input from the Comox First Nation, the Comox Valley Farmers Institute, Mid-Island Farmers Institute, the Solom River Restoration Society, the Conservation Partnership, and our Agricultural Watershed Planning Advisory Committee. And the final kind of consolidated list of these 7 recommendations was presented at the board meeting. The report also identified next steps to advance the recommended actions with proposed timelines and relative costs. And of those actions that were labeled in the report as now priorities, staff have selected several for immediate implementation in 2021 using existing resources. And these form the basis of the recommendations in front of you today. The other identified actions, which will require additional resources, we will review during the 2022 to 2026 financial planning process. So recommendation 1 recommends continued work with KFN to develop a collaborative approach to water management in the Solom. As you've heard, collaboration with the Comox First Nation has really played a key role in the development of the phase 2 report and will continue to play an important role moving forward. And there are many ways in which the KFN and CVRD can collaborate to support watershed health. And so it's recommended that further discussion take place at the council, board, staff, and provincial level to investigate and develop this collaborative approach. As part of this recommendation, it's also suggested that the CVRD and KFN advocate for the use of provincial tools available through the Water Sustainability Act. And it's understood that where there's alignment of interest between local governments and First Nations, there can be better support by the province for the use of these tools. Recommendation 2 recommends proceeding with the Watershed Stewardship Scoping Study, which was included in this year's budget for the feasibility study services 151, 152, and 153. We know additional resources and capacity will be required to support the actions put forward in the phase 2 report. And this study will help to investigate options for improved service delivery and recommend the best path forward. And we know watershed challenges are not unique to the Solom and are experienced in other Comox Valley watersheds, such as the Oyster River and Langley Lake. And so this work will really consider opportunities for improved service delivery valley-wide. The third recommendation in front of you recommends staff begin work to review land use planning tools and policies through a watershed stewardship and agricultural lens, and that this work be addressed during the consultation and drafting of the Comox Valley Agricultural Plan update. This review would be intended to identify gaps in current bylaws and policies and look at opportunities to address those. Some of the priorities that were identified in the phase 2 report include collaboration with KFN to incorporate their groundwater vulnerability mapping into land use planning, prioritizing agricultural use in the ALR, using caution in stressed areas, and tools to reduce water demand, and enhancing wetland protection. Recommendation 4 recommends collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture staff on efforts to assist existing users in licensing their wells. The March 1st, 2022 deadline for existing groundwater users to license their wells is very quickly approaching, and a workshop is proposed to assist local producers in the licensing process. And as you saw, the results of the technical study suggest that there will likely be challenges in obtaining a water license in the future in the Solom watershed, and particularly in the Portuguese Creek subwatershed. And so an existing use application really has a greater chance of approval than a new license application. So it's really highly recommended that existing users apply for their licenses as soon as possible to secure water access for their properties. And collaboration with ministry staff on initiatives to support producers in developing on-farm storage is also recommended, and this could take the form of education and knowledge transfer activities. And with that, I welcome any questions.
Thanks, Derry. I think I saw Director Arbor had his hand out.
Yeah, thanks. That's really good work and really good to see that proceed. And I'm in favor of all the recommendations. Neat to see the potential broader value thinking as well around the watershed stewardship piece. I have a question about the methodology for the work that was just completed because, well, it seems good, but on the prior slide with the evaluation of risk assessment, there's only 3 levels, you know, like 1, 2, 3. And I noticed that there was all these different scenarios with, you know, for 48% increase in forage and production and et cetera, et cetera. And that qualified as level 3. And then after that, it had all these scenarios plus climate change, but we still sat at level 3, right? Across all categories. So I found that the levels may not be very insightful for me as a member of, you know, the general public, so to speak, to understand what that might mean to management. And maybe my broader question, that's a specific question, but my broader question is, where did we get the methodology from? Is this a provincial kind of provided methodology that a number of regions are using, or did we choose and select a methodology for that watershed assessment that's I don't know, isolated from other efforts?
Through the chair. So it is a provincial methodology that was used to complete that work. And generally with that methodology, when there's a risk level 3 that's assigned, it's essentially a trigger for the provincial government to complete additional monitoring and analysis in those areas. So I think Mark spoke briefly about it, and it was mentioned in the staff report that Glenroe RD and the Comox First Nation have begun partnering on some monitoring efforts in the Lower Solom watershed in the last month or so, and that's an outcome of some of these risk ratings that were presented in this work.
That's great, and obviously it's concerning that 2/3 of the watersheds and scenarios seem to be in the level 3. So maybe that means thank you for saying that means that triggers other processes to further investigate. And I guess, yeah, really great work. Sorry, I'm outside my area in area B and C here, but really good work. Really glad to see it, and hope that it spreads around the valley over time.
Thanks, Director Arbor. Director Grieve.
Thanks very much, and thank you so much for doing this work. My only fear is that as detailed as this work is, I think that the baseline information is probably going to be thrown out the window in a couple of years. The way things are going, we just had we just tied this for the Death Valley, just tied the record for the hottest place on planet Earth ever recorded, 130 degrees centigrade. We know very little about aquifers. We can measure them at various places, but I mean, they're still basically a mystery, you know, especially at the different levels and the different aquifers. Luckily, we've got some good work going forward, but as I say, this is going to have to be an ongoing and continuing service of some sort, whether it's through the regional district or whether it's through the provincial ministries. But I don't think we can assume very much. We can extrapolate this and that from the data, but I mean, the thing is changing under our feet. I don't know about you guys, but I think Portuguese Creek is dried up now.
Always has been.
Totally dried up. I live right beside, it's not in this watershed, but the Kitty Coleman Creek, and it's just different pools right now. I've just pulled the lid off my well for the last week or so, and I'm measuring it daily. You know, I mean, we're just at the beginning of July, for heaven's sake. So this could go on till October, and like I say, all bets are off. So, you know, it's comforting to have this data, but you know, we may have to reevaluate it as time goes by every year. I think definitely the ag plan is going to help us out a lot for agriculture. I'm still dismayed to see driving through Area C and Area B to see the big irrigation guns going off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at 30-degree temperatures, and I just wonder how much of that water actually gets absorbed by the hay fields or whatever, you know, when they at that temperature, it's just going to evaporate right off the ground. So I don't know. Again, I think we have to work with farmers and the ministry and educate the fact that we can't do things the old-fashioned way. That it's a different day out there. So once again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Director Grieve. And staff know I have a lot to say on this issue. Primarily, I should preface this by saying that, you know, myself, our own farm is in that Portuguese watershed. And we noticed right when we moved into the valley that water was the limiting factor for agricultural production, and had the hindsight and good luck to have had good advice to put in a dugout. And I just have to say, like, the economics of a dugout are just so far superior than anything else. So I thank staff for at least this report confirmed what our suspicions were, and in terms of storage. And for the directors, you know, a well can cost anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000. A dugout is about that same amount, and for that price, you can get about 500,000 gallons of storage of water. And this is generally water. A dugout is only winter rainwater. It's not spring fed. So this water generally we stop it from flooding into the creeks and the rivers in the wintertime when it can exacerbate issues. And we hold that until the summer months when it's needed. However, $10,000 to $15,000 is not a trivial amount of money. And I've spoken to staff too, that with the hopes of potentially asking the Minister of Agriculture if some kind of supportive funding could be made available for this area, highlighting the level of intensity of intense stress on Portuguese watershed. I'm going to echo Director Grieve's comments on, you know, thanking staff for providing all of this data, because it's certainly what we needed to move ahead. And I thank KFN for their participation and their approach to us understanding and moving forward and looking at this from a watershed basis. And I really support us moving forward on creating that type of watershed service. I wanted to ask, because I saw in the report, the use of Water Sustainability Act tools. Would staff be able to maybe go into a little bit more detail what those tools are?
Sure. I guess just broadly to answer your question, Madam Chair, one of the, I guess, biggest tools available under the WSA is the development of a water sustainability plan. That's kind of a very comprehensive planning process that takes a lot of resources and a lot of time. And I guess the benefits are that it's really kind of locally focused. It can kind of develop new governance relationships with the watershed. It can be very adaptable over time, and it really kind of brings that whole picture approach of kind of land use and water management together for the local area. There has not yet been a water sustainability plan completed in the province yet. There are some communities that are kind of advancing scoping studies to look at the development of such plans, but it is quite a strong tool. And under that plan, there's also the availability to use another tool, which is an agricultural water reserve. So that would be kind of water that would be reserved specifically for agriculture and not just current use, agricultural use in the future. So a lot of the water licensing, or I guess how water licensing is currently done in the province is it's kind of, if you don't use it, you lose it, but that tool would allow you to keep that water available in the future. Yeah.
I can foresee some kind of conflicts though with the environmental flow needs. So would you be able to, do you have any details on that yet, or is it too early?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly it's a very kind of whole process, collaborative approach that would be used to develop that plans, and it would consider all of those things together, the environment, local producers and other land uses in the area.
Okay, thanks. I think staff may have heard my comments when Mark presented to the regional district meeting. We came to this, the need to do these agricultural watershed plans because of the oversubscription on the river. And, we have some very, I guess, 30,000 foot type of planning being done. My question at the time was, we still have an oversubscription in the summer months, particularly. And although I totally support farms putting in better irrigation, especially for the vegetable farms, the farms that are primarily have the licenses on the river don't tend to be the vegetable farmers. And so I have a bit of conflict in I support, people using drip for those farming systems that can use that, but are we then enabling the poor use of water from the river by kind of forcing conservation by those other farmers and allowing, as Director Grieve said, some of the not so conservative use of water on other land? I don't know if you've got a comment on that.
Can you clarify what you mean by forcing the use of?
Well, if we're encouraging water conservation, especially drip irrigation, that's not being done by the folks that have those licenses, because most of the dairy meat farmers have to use overhead irrigation to do their large fields. So conservation on one side by vegetable farmers, is that still enabling poor water use, more extravagant use on the other, and really not forcing any kind of water efficiencies? Is there ability to target the licensed users, particularly on the river, to change their water use applications?
To answer your question, Madam Chair, there was a number of recommended actions put forward in the report, not just for vegetable farmers, but also for forage crops. So it would address possibly such things like Director Grieve mentioned around the scheduling of irrigation and potentially more efficient overhead irrigation techniques as well. Yeah, as well as education.
Great, thanks. Director Arbor?
Yeah, just speaking in support of some of your observations, Chair Mir. You know, what we're experiencing this summer is pretty much aligned with the models that we've been discussing since 1990 something in terms of climate projections and for the coast, especially. So it's funny, even 10 years, 10 years ago in the Facebook forums, that there was still a lot of people really pushing against the trend in climate science. And I'm basically hearing crickets now, especially this summer. And the trend is very clear. Drier summers, hotter summers, and more extreme events and wetter winters potentially on the coast. So I think this plan is excellent because it's addressing a problem that's not going to go away, that's not temporary. And I think some of the inkling around solutions, and I've always liked, ever since I heard Dr. Amir talk about that, the dugout approach for a lot of farms. You lose available land to farm, I guess. So you have to build that into your plan. But we're definitely heading into water scarcity, into a water scarcity era in the summer, and we may continue to do okay in the winter. So those kinds of solutions are great. So I agree with any programs that can improve the scalability. And in regards to the different users and the pressure against environmental needs, that's also going to escalate. And again, I think better have that roundtable and start those conversations now and not hesitate to have those hard conversations. But I would hope, I won't hope super long because I doubt that will happen. I've got the same problem in the forestry side. I would hope the province would offer some leadership because it's going to be a problem everywhere. So I think our role is the right one right now with this to facilitate discussion, to start some pilot things, do some education, to work closely with Comox. So all the things. So I'm in support, but I think Dr. Hamir might be a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of some of the future solutions that might be marginal right now, but that will actually be very mainstream in a few years from now. So the more we can prep the ground for that, the better. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Arbor. If I can make a comment before Director Grief puts on. One of the alarming things about the Portuguese watershed being oversubscribed for groundwater is the soil type in this area, which is on the west side of Highway 19, is one of the best soils in the valley in terms for vegetable production. We are on a pure loam. I actually have no rocks on my land, which on Vancouver Island is usually unheard of, but the flooding of Portuguese Creek over eons deposited so much silt in our area that it makes such a fantastic vegetable growing medium, but that requires water availability. And if we are wanting to, as a region, increase our local food supply, especially around vegetables and fruits, this would have been my recommendation for the more intense area for vegetable production. So I'm hoping that we can put on our thinking hats of how we can move forward with the agricultural plan and our recommendations, keeping in mind soil capability, water availability, and come up with some constructive ideas. Director Grieve. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, thanks. So it's important to note that we're not alone in this, that it's going to be a pretty universal experience going across countries and continents. So it's not as though we have to come up with solutions from scratch here. We're all going to be in the same situation. So we don't necessarily have to lead this parade, but we certainly have to lead the education piece and make sure that people are aware of what is going on and what potential solutions we can make. As I say, that all this information is important, but it might all change in 4 years and something else quite different again. But yeah, no, it's very sobering. More efficient use of water. You need to see a little bit of the province has to step up to the plate. I think they have to assume a leadership role on this issue, and make some hard decisions that may not be popular with everybody. Geez, isn't that just like politics? Thanks.
Director Harbour, do you have another question or comment?
No, thanks. I just left
Okay.
my line.
All right. I'm going to agree with Director Grieve on his last comment that bringing the province in, and when we come to the recommendations, I'm wondering if directors would support a fifth recommendation of talking to the Minister of Agriculture around our water supply issues and meeting with staff around potentially looking at some kind of program. Director Grieve, did you have a comment?
I'm all for that. I think that's important. And we don't have to make it a UBCM speed dating interview because we do live only a few hours north of the capital, so we can probably set something up.
Okay, great.
And probably sooner than later.
Thanks. My only other comment on, it'll come up in the recommendations on item number 4 regarding the efforts to increase licensing of wells. I'm wondering if staff could also send out mail outs, particularly for the Portuguese watershed area, because I happen to know many neighbors who have unlicensed wells in that area. And I don't think it's really well understood about how, we have to go back in time when the Water Sustainability Act came in, very few farms and rural residents registered their wells. And I think it's still the case, maybe 4,000 in all of British Columbia. And so there's a lot of hesitancy around licensing of wells, but particularly for Portuguese Creek area, if we think that new licenses will be hindered or in some way, encumbered, then this should be made. I don't know if everyone's aware of that. And if a mail out can go to those residents, just informing them, and then plus having workshops, I think that would be very helpful. Okay, Director Harbour? Or?
Yep, sorry, Madam Chair, I was just going to say that we'll probably do it across the entire watershed, not just the Portuguese, but definitely the Portuguese area would be included in any initiative that we do. But we'll also work closely with the ministry because we need to be mindful that part of the problem is they don't have the resources to process those applications and there's a lot of holdups. So the last thing that we want to do is encourage something that they can't follow up with. Right. So we'll ensure that we communicate in the right time, in the right manner, that we're helping both sides, the processing as well as producers and landowners make those applications.
And I guess one of the issues is there's 2 different ministries we're talking about, right? Flinro is with the water licensing and ag is with everything else. Director Harbour.
Yeah, I actually think we need to lead, it's we've got a good regional district. We've got some expertise and experience in both of our directors in that area and understanding of the issues. I think the era of waiting to see what great solution emerges is past, and piloting and modeling and creating pilot areas I'm fully in support of. I was just on a call last week with DFO, and lo and behold, all that work we did 2 years ago around area-based management, they are now going to find a pilot on the coast to bring it forward. And that could mean co-governance with First Nation and all these different things. And then the process of trying to identify a pilot area that will bring leadership and innovation and experimentation to the table. And one of the discussion we had was the scales. So they're setting up the pilot in a way that they see the entire west coast of British Columbia as the area of interest, but then it's broken down into more specific areas that align with maybe First Nation governance, communities, industry, and then some sites that are more specific. And and I think it's probably hard for Dr. Amir to advocate too hard for Portuguese Creek because she lives there and farms there. But I'm actually in favor of, if we can pilot something. We've already done all this work at the higher level, initiated it. But I think at some point, unless we plan to engage with all residents, if we can focus education and pilot programs, for example, around dugouts or things like that, in an area that's manageable, and it sounds to me like Portuguese Creek could qualify for it, I think we need to operate at multi-scale, and I wouldn't shy away from going in an area that's more strategic and has more issues and actually has more potential on the food security side. So I really want to talk in support of us, not necessarily just staying at the watershed basin level, but for resident engagement and actually impact on the ground and resource efficiency. If we can focus in some areas. I'm not part of the agricultural planning process, but that's my feedback for today. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Harper, much appreciated. I don't see any other lights on. So I think we've had a pretty fulsome discussion on the topic. I'll just call the question on receipt of the report. Is anyone opposed to receipt? Hearing and seeing none, that's carried. We have recommendation 1, that the Comox Valley Regional District work with the Comox First Nation in developing a collaborative approach to water management for the Solom River watershed. Moved.
Second.
Second. Are there any other comments on that recommendation? Hearing none, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. Recommendation 2.
So moved.
Moved and seconded that staff be directed to proceed with the Watershed Stewardship Service scoping study to investigate options for improved service delivery by the CBRD. Any comments, Director Harper?
Thanks. Speaking on the motion, I really like how you have very different types of potential avenues to carry this work. So I really appreciated seeing that. I want to thank staff because it did expand my mind around what the investigation will look at. Initially, when I was thinking, for example, about Langley Lake, I was just like, okay, well, let's tie it to water rates and da-da-da. But I think if we look more holistically at the range of watershed issues and water management issues we're going to have across the valley, I think the list you assemble around the potential vehicles to look at that is excellent. So I just want to thank staff for really scoping exercise in a very holistic manner.
Thank you, Director Grieve.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm not sure if I missed this, but it says it talks basically about proceeding with the Watershed Stewardship Service scoping study. Now, this is not a new service. Are we talking about our liquid waste management service and rolling into that? Are we talking about actually going out and establishing a new service?
We're going to look at the options. There are services that we have that this may fall under, but then it will depend on your desire in terms of what's included. So we will look at existing services and falling under that, as well as the potential of something that might be a new service.
It does dovetail into our stormwater, rainwater, and all the rest of the issues.
Yeah, no, this definitely, there's lots of options. Is it a regional growth matter? Is it something that continues under the liquid waste service? Or is the liquid waste service redefined?
Yeah.
Is it part of the broader regional water service that we have? So lots of different options for us to look at and bring back to you the ideas.
Thank you.
Thanks, and Director Harper.
Yeah, well, great, awesome, fantastic. The only piece for me is that, it's going to be around for the next, well, for generations to come. I think those issues, and so I don't want to add one more, but one that still I'm going a little bit outside, but I think this one was not quite captured. But the one thing we don't have is a climate change service. And we posited it as a driver instead in all of our projects and initiatives. But just feedback, there may be that link, right, between watershed management and climate change, or maybe climate change would just be one of the driver around whatever we situate. So just thinking out loud, but I like that big picture thinking, and I assume that this would be done. So first we'll get the scoping report, and then if we decided to do amendments to any of our services or to establish a new service, then a feasibility would follow.
That's possible if it is talking about a new service, definitely. But right, yeah, scoping is broad. Scoping is providing the options and the ideas upon which you will decide where to go from here, from there.
One last question before I vote on the matter. Should we expect to receive that before the next election?
Before the next election, yes.
That was actually going to be my question, is the time frame for the scoping study. Do you have an idea?
Derry, do you want to speak more specifically to what you think?
Yeah, sure. To answer your question, Madam Chair, I think we'd like to get started as soon as possible. So possibly initiating that work in the fall, and we'll see. You know, it depends on the consultant's capacity as how fast it can go, but hopefully we'll be able to deliver it either by year end or kind of early 2022.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other comments. So on recommendation number 2, are there, oh, Director Albert, did you have another, is your hand up again? Oh. Okay, anyone opposed to recommendation number 2? Hearing and seeing none, that is carried.
Move 3.
Second.
Recommendation number 3 is moved and seconded that a review of land use planning and policy to protect watershed health and support agriculture be addressed in stakeholder consultation and drafting of the Comox Valley Agricultural Plan update. Any comments on that? Director Grief.
Not much of a comment, except this is going to be exciting. Thank you.
It certainly is. And, you know, in some ways, the complexity of adding the water side of things to an agricultural plan may require some extra resources. And I do know that the Real Estate Foundation has a separate water granting process. And I just want to flag that for staff. If something like that could be added on to the funding that we've already put aside for the ag plan. I won't, you know, change the recommendation, but seeing just the complexity, we may want to look at additional resources for that. Okay, I don't see any other comments. So on recommendation 3, is anyone opposed? And that is carried. And finally, recommendation number 4, that the CVRD collaborate with the Ministry of Agriculture to end, do we need to say Flynn Row? And
yeah, I think adding Flynn Row is a very good point to this as the ones that are looking after licensing.
great. In an effort to assist existing users in licensing their wells and supporting producers in developing on-farm water storage options. Is there a motion? Did we move in second already? Moved.
Second.
Second. And Director Grieve has a comment.
Well, just that now is the time to focus minds. We are, you know, approaching a drought, if we're not in a drought already. So I'm just hoping we can get this this engagement with the public sometime, you know, in September, but not much later than that, perhaps, because, you know, once it's like all things, and once it's off the radar, you know, you don't have the same turnout. Right now, I think everybody's very keen, and they'll probably get better outcomes for what we're looking to do if we can move it ahead. So I'm just wondering to staff, what is the timeline here? Do we have an idea?
Derry, could you comment on timeline for this?
Yeah, thank you, Director. I think we would be looking to move on this as soon as possible, but we'd be working in partnership with kind of our local agrologist. So it would depend on her resources and her work plan for the year as well.
Thank you. And I know normally the Farmers Institutes would also support, and most of them don't meet during the summer months. So just wanted to put that out there. Any other comments? Okay, hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed to recommendation 4? And that is carried. And I'd like to move a 5th recommendation that the Comox Valley Regional District collaborate with the Ministry of Agriculture on funding options for on-farm water storage, or should we make it very specific, or just funding options for agricultural?
Yeah, I would say funding options to support the,
Yeah.
the study or the work, yeah.
Okay, that's moved. Do I have a seconder? Director
Second.
Grieve? Great, thank you. And Director Grieve would like to speak to it.
I just don't think we should forget our federal ministries on this as well. Very important. We see a lot of money coming out of the federal government right now.
All right,
So let's not just limit it to the province. Thanks.
great. I'll make that a friendly amendment, both the federal and provincial ministers. All right. Any other comments on that recommendation? Okay. Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed? And Lisa, you've got the wording, sort of. That's right. Okay, thank you. And so hearing and seeing no one opposed, that is carried. Great. Item number 9, Union Bay Local Service Area Financial Overview for receipt.
Move receipt.
Moved, seconded, and
Thank you, Chair and Directors, and Kevin DeVell, Manager of Planning, Financial Planning, is here to outline this report and answer any of your questions. Just needs to grab the clicker.
Thank you, sorry.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to the directors, through the chair to the directors. So what's in front of you today is just a brief presentation, providing a bit of a high level look at the financial analysis and review that has recently been undertaken with respect to the 3 new Union Bay local service areas that are now coming online. So as you're obviously aware, the conversion of the Union Bay and Permit District over to the regional district became effective July the 1st. And in the lead up to that, certainly CBRD staff have been working very closely with UBID staff over the last several months, particularly within finance to understand the current financial state of where UBID is at and determining kind of where we feel we will end up towards the end of 2021. And certainly also looking ahead at the service establishment for the 3 new local service areas that will be coming formally online. So with respect to that work that has been undertaken, we have now developed 3 fairly comprehensive budget models that we are using kind of as the foundational piece or framework to build on going forward. And so as we note in the presentation there, that our intent is to be putting forward tomorrow afternoon to the CBRD board the new service and reserve establishment bylaws for second and third reading. Those have also been provided to the ministry for their some advanced feedback from them, in the hopes that we can then look at having the formalized establishments of these completed by early August, so that we can ensure that they make it into the 2022 completed assessment roll. So as indicating there, we will be looking at establishing the 3 unique services for Union Bay, that being the water local service area for fire protection and also for street lighting. And within those, we're also recommending that a number of reserves be established as part of those service establishments. So we'll be bringing forth those bylaws at the same time. Right now, we are looking to bring forward a capital works reserve and future expenditure reserve bylaws for the water service. We will be identifying a CICC or DCC bylaw at a later date, of which who would then be transitioning their capital expenditure charges bylaw or service into that. For fire protection, we'd then be looking at establishing both a capital works and a future expenditure reserve. And lastly, for street lighting, we are recommending that we establish a small future expenditure reserve there as well, just to ensure that we are putting some modest means aside in case we need to address any ongoing issues with respect to increased hydro rates or things of that nature. So what I've provided here is just a bit of an operational highlight, so you can kind of get a sense on a service by service basis, kind of where we are landing at this early stage. So we have taken a look at again at the 2021 adopted bylaw that Union Bay had put forward back in the fall. And so building on that, we've at this stage looked at projecting that out over the next 5 years. And that will help us then determine what maximum requisitions we need to be including within those bylaws. And I'll be speaking to those in a subsequent slide. So as you may recall, currently for the parcel tax for the water service, that is set at $390 per parcel. And currently there are 709 parcels that pay that parcel tax. We are anticipating that that rate will remain fairly flat for 2022, albeit there will be one additional parcel that we know is coming online ahead of 2022. So that will be spread across one additional parcel. We will also be undertaking, as requested by both the former UBIT board and certainly directors around this table, to take a look at those, what they call Class B parcels. So those are parcels within Union Bay that currently do not pay a parcel tax. So we'll be bringing a report back to this table, likely in the fall with respect to that. We are at this point then also anticipating that a modest increase would be put in place for 2023 to 2026. But obviously we want to make sure that you're aware that this is prior to undertaking any comprehensive work with respect to the water master plan that we are very much committed to undertaking as quickly as possible. And obviously also asset replacement and renewal, which is going to really better educate and inform and direct where the parcel tax rates will need to go going forward. But as we always do with any of our services, it would be a combination of once we have kind of a baseline of what the long-term transitional plan for the infrastructure in Union Bay will require, we will then look at what is the appropriate funding mix to support that sustainable service delivery over the long term. So that would be a mixture of potentially reserves, of which parcel tax helps to fund, as well as any grant funding opportunities that may come down the line, including potentially some community work fund down the line, or also any potential debt as well. With respect to the user rates, at this point, we have kind of done a pretty detailed kind of review with UBIT staff around, kind of the current state, and certainly tried to identify, where we kind of needed to look at, some enhancements to the existing operational budget. So there was a number of things that we really kind of took a look at. Certainly, first and foremost would be the, ongoing costs associated with the new water treatment plant. That's now been in place a little over a year. So we're starting to get a more fulsome kind of idea as to what the true costs are for that. So we've built in, some costing to ensure we are covering the full costs of things like chemicals and just the general operational day-to-day of that facility. With respect to that, we are also looking at the potential of some improvements around their SCADA system. So not only just on the software side, but we have recognized that there's certainly some internet connectivity deficiencies, to say it nicely, within that part of Union Bay. So we will be looking at potentially some improvements there. We also just wanted to make sure that everything had been accounted for within the Union Bay budget. So to ensure that all current staff that are coming over are fully allocated within the 5-year financial plan. So we've certainly undertaken to do that. And certainly with the collective bargaining that was recently completed with Union Bay and their transition over to the regional district, we just want to make sure we've identified all of the full remuneration and benefit costs associated with doing that as well. So it's important to remember that these are early days, that this is something that we will be certainly building on and continuing to bring back to this table and certainly to the board as part of the 2022, 2026 financial planning process. So there'll be certainly a lot more opportunities to kind of report things out to you and to certainly get your feedback. With respect to fire service, right now they're requisitioning $470,000 a year specifically from property tax for that service. Over the immediate short term, we're not anticipating really any changes in that regard, and then a modest bump as we move into kind of 2024, 25, 26. Again, just as we start moving closer towards the potential of a new fire hall in Union Bay, which is long overdue, and certainly looking at some upgrades to some of their firefighting apparatus as well. And just general cost of living increases and ensuring we're adequately resourcing the fire department going forward. And then lastly, with street lighting, again, a fairly simple and straightforward service, largely tax requisition that comes in, helps support the hydro costs associated with I believe it's about 140 streetlights that are currently in Union Bay and all solely owned by BC Hydro. So we are essentially, as many of our street lighting services, kind of the conduit or the flow through for those services. At this point, again, we've identified, some increases going into 2022, certainly as we get a more fulsome idea as to the ongoing hydro costs associated with those street lights, and particularly as they transition over to the flat lens or LED systems, and then certainly have undertaken to ensure that there's cost of living increases associated with that. Typically, with most of our street lighting services, we do budget fairly conservatively and look at anywhere from a 3 to 4% annual increase to hydro rates, just to make sure we have sufficient dollars there, because they are all relatively small services and have limited resources or capacity. Moving then into capital, just some highlighted capital projects for kind of your information. And we have identified a couple of projects that we will be looking to bring budget amendments forward to you kind of in the next few months, just for some immediate issues that we do need to address. Certainly the washroom or staff facility that we have talked about kind of in the past. To provide staff that are working at the treatment plant a place to utilize a washroom facility, have a small little maybe staff room or a small office. Right now, we've budgeted about $100,000 for that work, or anticipating that work will kind of come in around that. I've just spoken to the internet connectivity improvements that we're really feeling we do need to undertake sooner rather than later, and there will be some timelines that we have to kind of recognize with respect to Shaw's ability to undertake that work. At this point, we have estimated about $40,000 for that work based on my conversations with our IT department. And then moving into 2022, kind of one of the bigger items that we do need to address is the remediation of 451 McLeod Road, that being the former in-ground reservoir and chlorination station site. That is the site that has been leased from Union Bay Estates for the last 20 plus years. Now that everything has transitioned to the new location, as per the water infrastructure agreement with Union Bay Estates, we are, obligated to remediate that site back to more or less its previous state by the end of 2022. So we have received some quotes associated to do that work. At this point, we have estimated about $97,000 to undertake that work, but we will certainly continue to refine those estimates over the next little bit. And then lastly, at least at this point, until we get into that really fulsome asset management, would be a water meter replacement program. So currently we have budgeted within our budget models about $50,000 a year to undertake that work. It would be funded by a combination of reserves and a request that would be brought forward with respect to some small commitments of community work funding. Most of the meters, in fact, all of the meters that were installed in Union Bay, were put in place in 2004 and 2005. So they are starting to hit kind of their end of life. And certainly as we move from the former technology more to things like cell read and those kinds of things, we want to be able to kind of start implementing, kind of that type of technology. And so we would certainly be looking at a bit of a phased approach as to how we undertake that over a multi-year type situation. On the fire side, the two immediate projects that we've identified within our current financial capital planning is the replacement of one of two of the main fire engines. At this point, we have budgeted that based on, if a new fully, equipped fire engine were to be replaced in 2023, which would be about 550. But of course, we'll be working with the manager of fire services to really look at, kind of what is the most practical, way to proceed with that, given that until we certainly have a new hull in place, we will be challenged with making sure that any newer equipment could even fit in the existing hull, given its narrow nature. And then lastly, of course, looking out towards 2026 to really look at the creation of a new hull for that area of Union Bay. And at this point, based on some of our current projects that are underway, looking at a future year cost of somewhere in that realm of $3 million. And then the only really thing, obviously no capital on the street lighting side because we don't actually own that infrastructure. But as I mentioned, we'd be putting some small dollars away into an FE reserve just to cover costs, any additional or unforeseen costs that we may find we incur down the road. And then as part of the budget models that we've put together, that includes a pretty comprehensive look at both the reserve and debt management for all three of those service areas. So this slide here just kind of gives you a sense based on their 2020 audited financial statements, kind of where we're kind of starting from. And we're actually in the process of bringing over all those resources over to us and into our financial institutions. And then based on both the capital needs identified currently over the next 5 years and the reserve allocations, this is kind of what you would expect to see with respect to both the water and the fire protection reserves. And then, as I mentioned, some modest contributions of about $2,500 a year into the street lighting reserve to kind of top it out at about $12,500. As I've noted kind of at the bottom of this slide here, we're also, looking at the debt management, particularly the water treatment plant debt. So we've had a number of internal conversations around that, and what we've kind of landed on is to take that existing UBID loan. We are in the process of porting that over to us as the regional district under the existing terms and conditions, which were pretty favorable at this point. So, they're in a 2-year term and I believe a 1.5% rate. So it's a pretty decent term. And then at that time, about March 2023, we'd be looking at porting that over probably to some kind of MFA facility, certainly over a long-term respect. So we'll, kind of be coming back to you with some recommendations on what that may look like, whether we go with a 25 or a 30-year term, depending on what we feel the useful life of that asset is. So just in summary, to give you a sense of some next steps. So at this point, in order to facilitate the putting forward of the service establishments, we've come up with some current projections, for an initial kind of 5-year budget. At this point, we are anticipating, certainly on the operational side, that UBID's adopted budget, should be sufficient to meet the service needs going forward for the remainder of the year. Although, we will be certainly taking a look at those on a month-by-month basis to make sure that we're taking a look at those budget versus actuals and ensuring there are, in fact, sufficient funds available to meet the current obligations in place for those 3 services. As I noted previously, we'll be looking to bring some budget amendment forwards either in August or September of this year to address some of those capital needs for 2021 that I've spoken to already. And then we will be continuing to do, considerable more analysis as we move towards 2022-26 financial planning for these 3 respective services. And as part of that, we would be looking to bring back to both you and the board a report on the potential parcel tax levies and user rates being proposed as part of that 5-year plan. And also to give you an update on where we may be at that time with respect to completion of a water master plan and asset renewal and replacement. So that's the extent of my report. Certainly happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And I think for any folks who are in Union Bay, I first of all want to thank staff for such an extensive report, and seeing a service kind of come out from the very beginning. We're being very transparent in what we're foreseeing as costs. So I really thank you for that. I see Director Arper with a comment or question.
Thank you. For this first report in terms of those 3 new services, and looking forward to, I think I jumped the gun at the last board meeting. I thought we we were done the bylaws, but we were not, and we still had the service establishment to do, which will be tomorrow. So in terms of the budget assumption, well, first of all, there's the long-term picture. I think, as we all know, there's, when I see the water rates at 0% and understanding from the trustees, past trustees, some of the challenges, and from their staff around the state of perhaps the water mains, I don't think over the lifetime of that 5-year plan, I'm not sure if we'll stay at 0% pending the outcome of that work. And I think the residents of Union Bay should be made aware of that. So we definitely need a bit of education in terms of some of those potential cost increases in that service. In regards to the street lights, I'm a little bit surprised because I would think that the move to LED, which they've just completed, would actually reduce the electricity costs. So I don't fully understand the 3 to 4% annual increase assumption, because even for the homeowner, we know that LED draw quite a bit less than regular bulbs. So if we can look into that a little bit, so we have correct assumptions, that would be great. Even though small amounts in the great scheme of things. In terms of the 3 items that you're looking to put forward, one was not costed out, which is the completion of the water master plan. On your prior slides and in the report, you costed out the price of the washroom at 100K. And what's the other one at 40? The internet one. But the water master plan was not costed out. I'm wondering, before I comment further, whether you have an estimate on the cost of that work?
Just look to Mark Rutten he's looking to see what he can find with respect to the potential cost of that.
And perhaps it's not costed out because it's built in to the budget, but I doubt it. So that's why I thought I would ask, in case it's not built into the existing budget.
Sorry, I just can't find it right now, but I thought we had costed that project out at $50,000. And then the Emerson Road improvements was the one that we had not had a chance to create a budget for yet.
Right. And the Emerson Road improvement was slated for 2022, is that right? Or for this year?
It's something that we just became aware of very late in the conversion process. So we were informed by the trustees that that section of water main is prone to failures, and they suggested that we prioritize that and make some replacements there. So we're still determining exactly what that scope would look like and what those cost estimates will be and the timing for that project. So we don't have that figured out yet.
Got it. So I'll in my mind, I'll kind of bundle it in the water master plan, but I realize it might be a more urgent priority, perhaps. I don't know if we'll get to it before we complete the water master plan or not, but the water master plan, I'll take your word at the 50K, and then maybe assuming that it's not built into the existing 2021 budget to complete, but that we will do that in 2021. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes, we'll be getting started on it in 2021.
Okay, great. So I just want to say something that is not in the staff report, which, I think you're looking in August to bring up budget amendments to complete some of those priorities, but I would like to suggest consideration of a different approach for some of these items. I think a big reason why residents of Union Bay voted in favor of the regional districts, whether it was in our presentation or not is a different matter, but definitely the community conversation was excited about the possibility to access grants. And, a couple months ago, I was presented with a $500,000 community works allocation for Royston water service for the changeover. So rather than to look at a budget amendment that would go back to ratepayers, definitely for the washrooms and for the internet, I'm wondering if we would be able to do 140,000 Community Works grant allocation to this, or a mix. I just didn't see that option outlined in the report, and I did get feedback already from UBID, past UBID trustee and chair, that the optics may not be great, but I think the optics would be great if we decided to chip in with some Community Works to facilitate some of those interim projects, and in some way, I would say to lay out a bit of the welcome mat to those services in terms of our resource capacity.
Director, so we will definitely keep Community Works in mind for the future projects. I think we are responding to projects that were initiated by the Improvement District. That is with respect to the deficiency of the washroom not being established in their original construction, and a commitment that they made to undertake that project to finalize that need. And certainly the internet has just arisen as a requirement to better manage the works there. But Community Works was not considered as of this time, but we will consider the opportunity for that in future capital projects in Union Bay, and are very mindful of what grant opportunities might be coming forward that apply to any of the works for Union Bay or our other services.
If I may, a subsequent.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll reframe things a little bit differently, perhaps, in that I guess I'm looking at it a little bit different. Cumberland gets a new water treatment plan, and they're funded by senior government at 60 or 70%. Union Bay gets a $5-point-something million water plant, and so far no contribution from senior government. I don't see the washroom or the internet as kind of optional wish list things. I see them as being part of the overall project, which was missed because they didn't get any help from anybody. So I'll reframe my question. Is it actually feasible? Are we allowed to assign Community Works funds to those two projects in the short term?
Yes, that is possible. It was the decision of the Union Bay Improvement District to undertake their works independently, to not partner with the regional district on a regional solution for water supply and treatment. And we are just picking up the pieces for the decisions of the past and trying to move them forward at this time. But to answer your question, yes, Community Works could be allocated to this.
So if possible, at the next meeting, if that option could be laid out for consideration for the next CASC, I would appreciate it. In the interim, I think there's a UBID conversion meeting, and I can have further conversation with staff around the potential impacts on other projects and priorities that we have in the Bainstown area. Is that reasonable? Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thanks. I'm looking to staff to see if there's a comment there.
Reason is a matter for the directors to determine, not staff. So.
All right. Does that sound like a formal motion might be needed around that? I guess we're still on receipt though of the report. So does anyone have any other comments on that? Okay, hearing and seeing none on receipt, I'll call the question. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Director Arbor, did you want to make a motion?
What is the current motion? Is this just for receipt, this item?
It was just, yeah, it was just for receipt. So there's no motions.
So I would, well, let's do receipt first. Let's.
We did.
Oh, sorry, sorry. So yeah, I would move that an option be added at the August meeting to a budget amendment. So, and the option being that we look at an assignment of Community Works Fund for the priority projects identified.
Seconded. Okay. Is there any other to speak to the motion? Any other comments? Hearing and seeing none. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. All right, moving on to Denman Island Hornby broadband internet service connection for receipt.
Move receipt.
Moved and seconded, and over to staff.
Thank you very much, Chair and Directors, and James Warren will outline this report and the recommendation and answer any of your questions.
Thanks, Russell, and good afternoon, Directors, Chair and Directors. So this staff report presented today is recommending that the RD proceed with the required public engagement and approval process for a broadband connectivity service on Denman and Hornby Islands. The CVRD might have an opportunity here to financially contribute towards high-speed internet on Denman and Hornby. Electoral approval would still be required in order to establish such a service or amend an existing service in order to raise the appropriate funds. Electoral approval would also be required to enter into a partnering agreement with City West, which is a City of Prince Rupert owned corporation. And electoral approval would be required to borrow the up to 10% of a community contribution for last mile infrastructure, the fiber installation. The CVRD has not historically delivered internet services, nor collected funds to contribute towards broadband infrastructure. However, this opportunity exists whereby senior government grant funding of up to 90% might be available to provide that high-speed internet to the homes on Denman and Hornby. Staff is proposing that a referendum would be used to look for that electoral approval for a variety of points. And elector support would indicate that broad community support for the initiative. If the board supports the recommendation presented today, then a future staff report would dig into the details around timing, the specific financial impacts, and looking for any sort of senior government grant announcements around that 90% funding. Briefly, this staff report does go into the financial impacts, and as shown on table 5 of the report, the CVRD would need to contribute up to $760,000. That represents the 10% investment for the broadband infrastructure. And just to pull out one financial impact, if that money were borrowed over a 10-year span, the cost to an average house of $500,000 assessed value would be $39.30 over the 10-year span. The table goes into some other options around funding. The staff report also includes 2 appendices to consider whether the referendum, whether the public engagement would be focused in on just the broadband activity or more expansive and considering some of the other pressures and priorities that are known to be happening on Denman and Hornby Island. Appendix B describes some of those additional pressures, including cost increases that are expected or occurring around recycling and waste management. The Hornby Island Arts Council has initiatives, ongoing pressures around community halls and facilities, and even just today, discussions around the Denman dock and boat ramp. Staff do recognize the timing and work that's already been done with Denman Works and the Hornby Island Community Economic Enhancement Corporation, HISEC, and the extensive work they've undertaken to lay some of the groundwork for public interest around a broadband structure. And so staff are recommending that a fall referendum be considered, being mindful of the other cost pressures that do exist on the islands. So Madam Chair, if there's any questions, we've also got financial services staff here to support any of the questions that might come up, but happy to hear the discussion.
Thank you so much. And Director Arbor has a question.
Thank you once again. Excellent work on this project. I think, you know, it's not a space that we currently occupy, and there's definitely been, since the start of the term, a couple of ups and downs in regards to opportunities through senior government or otherwise to try to service these islands and bring them up to standard or better than standard around internet. And obviously we made the allocation of, as outlined in the staff report, for a landing site for the Connected Coast project, which offered the option, should we secure senior funding, to bring fiber optic basically and look at last mile. So I think a lot of this work won't be useful if we're not able to secure senior funding and contract that out. But I really like the thinking around the different options, including the different cost pressures in the community. I think as you outlined, at $39 a year or something like that, if we got a 90% grant, this is probably not going to be the major cost driver for the island, but nonetheless, a part of it. It's we saw for $20 a month with the garbage and recycling that every dollar matters, right? Elsewhere in the region. But basically, I think your plan is right. I think the options are right, and I also support the staff recommendation. And hopefully, we hear a little more from senior government whether these things are real or not around our opportunities to get some support to actually install the fiber. But I would be fine with that. I was toying with the notion of pushing it as well to the ballot, the municipal election. But I understand, based on what's in the report around the timing, potential timing, and requirements of the senior government, should we receive a grant and sign it, that time window would be too long. So I'm in favor of proceeding now with the steps you follow. So basically, option one. And I really want to thank staff for all this work. I know, as you saw in the consultation rounds, that people are generally supportive, but hey, we also saw that with with our survey of the garbage and recycling. So for a while I was like, oh, maybe we can just do it inside the EgDev service or something like that. But I think you're right. I think seeking electoral assent on the potential project of this magnitude is the right course after some sober reflection on my part. So thank you. I'll be supporting the staff recommendation today.
Thanks, Director Arbor. Director Graef.
Yes, thanks, Director Arbor. Area C will be anxiously watching the outcome.
Great. I don't see any other comments. On receipt of the report, is anyone opposed? That's carried. And we have a recommendation. Moved. And
Second.
Seconded. Comments on the recommendation? I think everybody's hungry. Hearing and seeing none, that is carried. And we have a recommendation to move in camera for 91F and 91G of the community charter.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. Is anyone opposed? And that's carried. Thanks. So we'll just